Good day, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation number 99. Hang on, let me just check this. Okay, sorry, guys. This is something I have to do every week because I have to keep the stream open on another screen. Okay, as always, I'm going to start us off with a tune. There we go. And that was the 80th Regiment Staffordshire Volunteers, Slow March. And the guys in the photograph were Colour Sergeant Anthony Booth and Private William Wassell, who both won the Victoria Cross in the English Civil War. Okay, how are we going today, gents? Mitch, how you going, mate?
I'm just doing the same old.
All right. Did you have a first subject you wanted to bring
up? There's the topic of Ukraine, but there's also an article which I put in private chat where it's all about. Well, the title is "Multiculturalism: Is Poland ready for it?" So, it looks like based Poland's going the same way as Ireland.
So they're trying to infect them with the gay, aren't
they? The thing about the Polish is they're willing to just accept it. I mean, that's what it looks like to me.
Yeah, I must admit it's quite strange to me. Poland, ever since this Ukraine war kicked off, they seem to be very. I've just put the link for the article in the chat there for you, Mitch.
Yeah, the only thing is it's all in Polish. So you have to put go to automatic translate, but yeah.
Oh, okay, fair enough. So perhaps you could tell people what it says roughly.
Okay, I'll bring it up. So it's just multiculti, is Poland ready for it? And it goes on about how, in terms of the top 3 countries where migrants to Poland come from, Ukraine, of course, is the highest because of recent events. Then you've got the Philippines because Law and Justice say that, Philippines coming over is good because they're Catholic. And then, of course, they've also said there's a growing South Asian population. So, look, and judging from Harvard, it's pretty much like they're working gig economy jobs, like Just Eat, Uber, those sort of things. So, yeah. It seems to be big cities like Warsaw and Krakow and cities like that. They'll be really westernized areas.
Okay, so basically, Poland's probably going to go downhill fast.
Yeah, I'll give it 10 years, 15 years at max before it turns the same way as Ireland.
It's not going to be very good, is it, for the Poles, who are always one of the more base people. It's funny, isn't it, that Poland so hates Russia that they're willing to sacrifice everything else for that, so far as I can say.
Yeah, it's what look. The same goes for countries like the Baltic states and Ukraine. In that they're willing to just cut their own nose off to spite the enemy in form of Russia.
The Franklin in the chat says the Poles need South Asians to remind them of when they lived in London.
Fucking grief.
Yeah.
It's even more curious with some of the Baltic nations because they are allowing in tons of quote unquote dissident Russians just to basically spite the Russian government, even though their populations in the first place aren't that huge. So places like Estonia and Latvia, I think, were already having somewhere like anywhere up to 20% of their existing population being ethnically Russian. So if they're allowing in a load more Russians who are fleeing conscription, then it's you don't have to. It doesn't take too much of a stretch of the imagination to realize that that's going to have some pretty significant electoral consequences if that sticks.
And do you really want people who are running away from conscription? They don't exactly sound like nice citizens to me, but you really want. I mean, if say Ireland had a conscription and they all fled to the UK, would we really want them? I mean,
we don't even know that they're not patriotic Russians because they might still just be. They might still be patriotic, but basically just be cowards or not want to actually face conscription. But
I'm sure there'll be a fair number of Russian operatives amongst them as well, because it's a very good way to get operatives into countries that don't like you.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, and look, I'm basically on Russia's side in the Ukrainian war. I never made any bones about that because I think NATO caused it by NATO's expansion. But
I mean, like Rupert said, there's no. We can't really say one way or the other that the Russians that are leaving to Eastern Europe are going to be bad for those places. But I would say there's probably a bit of a selection pressure on the sort of people that would be migrating that way.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, like I say, I also think there's definitely going to be Russian operatives amongst people who are moving to the Baltic states. Because that would just make sense from Russian intelligence point of view, and it would be easy to put a few in there. I mean, look, Poland, like the other week when that Ukrainian anti-aircraft missile landed on Poland. I mean, Poland were basically calling to start World War III over it.
Yeah,
I mean, let's make no mistake. If NATO starts fighting Russia for any reason whatever around Ukraine or Poland, if we start fighting Russia for any reason, there is a 85% chance at least it's going to turn into a nuclear war, and that's curtains for everybody. Because you can't win a nuclear war. No side can. Nearly everyone will just die. And that's what Poland were basically calling for. Because the Russians won't turn around and say, "Oh no, we'll just do what you say."
Well, I mean, no war ever really escalates into a nuclear war proper, though, does it?
Oh, I think if NATO and Russia actually started facing off, I think it well could do, Ataman, to be honest with you. I really do.
Well, what's that bit in Yes, Prime Minister when the guy says, they'll take Germany salami style or salami tactics, like slice by slice.
Yeah, I did.
Like constantly pushing the boundaries a little bit more of what you can get away with without your opposition pushing the button.
Listen, I think the people who will go nuclear will be NATO because we don't have the conventional forces. I don't think people. Some people realise how tiny the British armed forces are today, weakest they've ever been in their history. Some people realise that, but I don't think people generally realise how weak NATO is overall. Like the German army is a shadow of what it was in the 1980s and 90s. French army, but
the American army alone outstrips Russia anyway.
No, I don't think
generally
that's
anyway.
True.
But
no, look, I don't think that's true, Ataman. Certainly not in Europe, it isn't, because the American army is scattered all around the world. And B, like I said, I don't think the American army does outstrip the Russians these days, to be honest with you. I really don't. And they can't even recruit up to their proper rates because the American army's gone so woke. And most of the people they are recruiting are either fat and unfit or female.
Yeah.
So I don't
I mean,
know.
a lot of this can come down to just like a handful of really quite decisive engagements, though, because it's worth bearing in mind that any army, so both going for the US and Russia, is going to be vastly disproportionately, or going to have its combat effectiveness vastly disproportionately affected by a relatively small number of casualties. So they could lose a fairly inconsequential battle, but lose a lot of their most seasoned, battle-hardened frontline troops. And then, although that only represents, let's say, 0.05% of their entire manpower availability, that's not counting the fact that so much of that manpower is just cooks, cleaners, second tier, like rear echelon units.
In Western armies, yes, that's very true.
Well, I mean, that applies to Russia as well, because obviously
much less. Russia has a much smaller tail than Western forces do.
Yes, that is true.
And on top of that, Western forces, we thought we were losing a lot of guys in Afghanistan and Iraq. Russia is losing as many people as we lost in Iraq in like 2 weeks, and Ukraine's losing as many people as we lost in Iraq in a day.
One does have to wonder if they're like figuring out ways of actually. Yeah. One does have to wonder though if they're finding ways to actually reduce the pain of losing that amount of troops, because obviously if you lean very heavily on a system where basically human capital is the be all and end all, and you just rely on highly skilled troops, versus creating a system that is going to be more capable of sustaining losses because the individuals in the positions don't matter as much as the way that the whole machine is kind of constructed. And I think that's generally more the Eastern way of doing things. I remember reading something about their equipment, where basically they make it so that the equipment it doesn't quite fire itself, let's say an anti-aircraft missile, but you've got far fewer things to learn. Basically, there's far less calibration to do on the human side. So if you put a conscript in that position, he's much more capable of doing it compared to all Western equipment, which again relies very heavily on human capital.
There's some truth in that. I mean, the Russians have got much more and better artillery than any of the Western nations, including the Americans. The Laurierist in chat is saying, as far as he knows, the Americans are unmatched in logistics capacity. That's all well and good, and professionals talk logistics and amateurs talk tactics, but in Europe, the Americans do not have a single armored division, not one. And trust me,
we're pretty good at logistics too.
Yeah, the Brits are pretty good at it.
That's one of the only things our army's still actually good at.
Yeah, well, the Brits have got very big logistics tail, but like Ataman, the entire British army would fit. The entire British army, every single cook and bottle washer in the British army would fit into Wembley Stadium and leave space.
Mm.
That's how small the British army is. It's tiny.
Yeah. Well, the other thing about
in a Ukraine-Russia style war, the British army would be completely destroyed in a month at most.
Oh, well, never mind the fact that we'd be out of our artillery shells in.
We'd run out of ammunition in 2 weeks.
2 weeks, that was it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, the other thing worth bearing in mind is that just because of that logistical, like that overwhelming logistical superiority, they've become a bit lax about it. So although they have a lot of throughput, they're not very efficient about it. I believe just with all the stuff that they basically bring around in every combat unit, it requires such a massive amount of, for example, fuel passing through that their logistical lines, where they come under threat, would be severely crippling. Basically, like they could probably not sustain that much of a huge amount of damage to their logistical lines before the entire thing starts getting bogged down. And they kind of found this in Vietnam. And Vietnam is quite an interesting scenario for their sort of for how they respond to logistical challenges, because what they basically ended up doing there was to just completely massively up-arm their entire logistical network. But in doing so, they obviously make it even less efficient, because the process of getting things like fuel through becomes a more expensive proposition in itself. So the actual net fuel that you bring to your destination is much less, relatively speaking. So the whole thing gets quite cumbersome.
Also, modern American armored formations use enormous amounts of fuel, particularly because the Abrams tank, for example, has got a jet turbine engine and it drinks fuel. One reason,
Yeah.
people were talking about giving Abrams tanks to the Ukrainians, and they never will, because the Ukrainians wouldn't be able to use them. Part of the fact they're like 62 tons and wouldn't be able to go across most Ukrainian bridges.
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing that I'm getting at. They've not designed much of their stuff with like fuel conservation and efficiency in mind. Fuel being the big thing, because they just don't consider it a thing that they need to be worried about. So if that would be a threat, if that would be put under threat in a situation much like the Ukraine war is for both sides, then the logistics would be probably a much bigger problem than they are for either side of the Ukrainian war right now.
As far as I can see at the moment, and I do follow it as closely as I can, given I'm in the West and the Russian stuff is all censored here. The Russians are still winning. They are gradually taking out nearly all of Ukraine's electricity and gas and petrol systems, which is going to make life very, very difficult for Ukraine in the hard winter that Ukraine almost always gets. And a lot of people are saying there's, because of all the the guys who've been mobilized in Russia, which is like about 317,000 apparently. The Russians are probably going to launch some sort of winter offensive once the ground's hard enough, because it's frozen. I think Ukraine's going to be up shit creek without a paddle by the end of the winter, at most. But, time will tell. Mitch, sorry, Ataman, carry on.
Oh, sorry, that was me, Rupert. But,
I beg your pardon. Carry on, Rupert. I beg your pardon. I thought it was
there was a pretty interesting analysis on that I saw, which is that recently they were able to completely take down the Ukrainian rail network, essentially. So all rail travel was shut down for somewhere either a day or a bit less than a day, I think. So the argument being that that's sort of a test run for what they might do in the near future, which is that quite a large amount of troops are not present in the actual theatre of, in like the southern theatre. And there's obviously been a lot of footage and a lot of rumblings about significant amounts of troops being present in Belarus. So this analyst has suggested that basically what they're going to be doing is sending an invasion force of somewhere in the region of 250,000, probably learning from all of their hard-learned lessons from the last time that they made a move on Kiev and trying to strike towards Kiev again sometime in the winter after they've launched a massive missile strike that would take down Ukraine's ability to respond to that in a strategic sense, before they can't really redeploy troops in the way that they have been able to in the past.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. Mitch, you're our expert on this stuff because you speak Russian and can read Russian. How do you say things are going at the moment in Ukraine?
I mean, I posted a bunch of images in my Discord the other day, I think, where it was Ukraine at the start of the year with all the lights on and whatnot, versus Ukraine now where it's pretty much dead. Like there's no lights on or anything. I
saw that. The satellite image. Yes, I saw that. It's like a satellite image at night where you can see all the lights of the cities and the villages and towns. And like the one you put up was, this is for people in the chat. The one you put up was, the first one was like pre-war when there's lights all over Ukraine, and the other one was like last week, and there's like very few patches of light here and there. Yeah,
it looks like, so you get people who say, oh, well, this isn't going to make Ukraine surrender. And I'm just like, I don't think that's the objective. What B is.
Doesn't it also stop most of their railway trains? Because the vast majority of their railway trains are electric, aren't they?
Yeah. Apparently, I've heard about they're trying to get like fuel generators, but even then, the Ukrainian fuel generators have been targeted also. So it's not just electrical. It's, you look at the modern world today. I'm studying electrical. I know how much of a modern world in a country like Ukraine, for example, depends on electricity. So all the substations and all the transformers and all the power stations getting bombed. You can't fight a war when you're not got the lights on, and you certainly can't fight a war when the train stations and the trains have no energy to operate with. And the trains
and people don't realise that even today, armies use trains a lot to move troops and armoured vehicles because you don't want those armoured vehicles running on their tracks, and no one has enough tank transporters and what have you.
Yeah, it's not just that. I mean, you've got the Lancet drone system, Lancet drone that the Russians operate, also Lancet missile. But but you use those against Ukrainian tanks, and they're proven to be quite effective because they're relatively cheap, and they are quite effective against most of Ukrainian tanks, like the Soviet stuff. So it's like if they were to march down a bunch of tanks in the middle of like rural Ukraine all the way to Kiev, let's say in the middle of winter, hypothetically, if Russians were to attack there, any tanks approaching a road like that would just get targeted by drones.
Well, I mean, also another thing that civilians don't realise is that tanks and also infantry fighting vehicles and armoured personnel carriers, all of those vehicles have a track life. Like the tracks wear out and have to be replaced after a certain point. So, you can't move them hundreds of miles on roads. Apart from the fact, don't do your roads much good either, by the way. But you just can't do that. It's not possible. So if the Ukrainians cannot use their trains to move troops and armored vehicles and other heavy equipment, it's a huge handicap to them. And basically, the Russians seem to at the moment have shut down about 60% of the Ukrainian railways.
Yeah, it's like Ukrainian roads are pretty bad. Like from what I've heard, like
just look. I mean, you can see when you look at them that there's like a lot of dirt tracks and all this kind of stuff, and even the roads that are tarred are not always in the best condition.
Yeah, then you got Belarus, where the roads are in top condition compared to Russian and Ukrainian roads. I mean, Russian roads are pretty good in the west of the country, like Moscow and St. Petersburg. Ukraine, I've heard I think it's like Donetsk Oblast was one of the wealthiest oblasts, and had some of the best roads, but the war kind of overturned a lot of that. So it's like you take Western Ukraine, where the railways are sort of decent enough, but the roads, like paved roads and whatnot, not the best, shall we say? From other, then you've got, compared to whereas you've got Belarus, which if you were to launch an assault from there, the roads are in pretty damn good condition, and it's logistically will not be a problem for the Russians to attack Kiev again. But I don't know, because I mean I've heard also that the Russian tanks and APCs and whatnot tore up a lot of those Belarusian roads. So I don't know. I don't even know if Lukashenko will actually be okay with a Russian invasion again, because he already tore up the roads first time round. I don't know what state the roads will be in when the Russians attack through Belarus again, for the sake of argument.
Yep. I mean, look, I don't want to spend too much time on this because we talk about the Ukraine situation almost every week, which is fair enough because it's an ongoing major thing. Which is having a big effect on Western nations, including the UK, largely from our own fault, because I think we should be entirely neutral in this. I'm not pro-Ukraine at all. Does Rupert or Ataman have anything to add on this subject?
There's one more point that I wanted to raise quickly, which is that Draco made a good point that in the chat that I was going to raise myself. Essentially, the attack on the power grid is not only a move that is strategic in the sense of changing the battlefield situation, but also in the sense of how it affects the capacity of the Ukrainian state to continue the war from an economic perspective. Because one thing that they were hoping to do, from what I can tell, is to export electricity to Europe as a way of helping to fund the war. And obviously, if they can no longer do that, then they go from being an asset to Europe to being a liability to Europe in that way as well. So
absolutely correct. Ukraine's not going to be exporting energy to anybody, I don't think. And it's notable that the Russians have also been hitting Ukrainian gas and also to some degree their oil centers as well. So when I say gas, I'm using it in the European sense, not the American petrol sense. I like I said, I think. I've always thought Ukraine in the longer term is going to lose this war so long as Russia has the gumption to keep going, and I think Russia does have the gumption to keep going. Because I think Russia can't afford to lose, basically.
Yeah, I mean, let's say for argument's sake, Russia ever lost this war. I can't see Putin staying in power for very long.
No.
You can just imagine someone like Strelkov would just get in charge, and for all the talk about of Adolf Hitler and the fascist Russia or whatever you want to call the place, Putin's a bloody pussy compared to the likes of Strelkov, Kadyrov, and that Yevgeny Prigozhin in charge of the Wagner PMC.
I'd be surprised if any of those characters actually managed to get to the top job. But even Medvedev is a lot more hawkish.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I think Mitch is entirely right. Putin would not survive Russia losing this war. I think if necessary, Russia will call up another 300,000 reservists, which they could easily do. They have far more than that. It's not a difficult thing for them to do. They wouldn't be quite as recent as the 317,000 they just called up, but they would still be guys who are basically trained soldiers and who would just need a refresher course. It's not the same as bringing in civilians who don't know how to, don't know anything about firing a rifle and all this kind of stuff. It's not the same at all. These guys who have already done their military service, all they need is a couple of weeks or a month's refresher course, and they're pretty much ready to go.
Yeah, I can imagine Dmitry Medvedev. I'm not surprised that he'd be. I mean, to be fair, his Telegram is pretty borderline Fed posty. So I can just imagine him, for the sake of argument, him in charge of a war, and he'll just be like, he'll go even harder than General Armageddon in terms of the missile strikes. It's also coincidental that Medvedev actually means the bear in Russian, so I'm not surprised that he's that Fed posty.
Well, I mean, also like the Western analysts, because I follow what the Western people say. There's a really sort of crackling noise going on every few seconds. I don't know what it is.
It's probably my water bottle.
Okay, it is, mate, because it's really loud. But anyway, it's the Western analysts were saying like months ago that Russia's almost out of missiles, and yet they used a record number of missiles. Like, what was it, a week ago? It's like, so they're certainly not nearly out of missiles. The people who are out of missiles are the Brits, and increasingly even the Americans are running out of stuff that they can send to Ukraine.
3,400, I think, was a number that Zelensky used since the start of the war.
Yep. And that's assuming that the Ukrainians are accurate, and let's say, generally speaking, they're not. So they might even have been more than that. So who knows? Because sometimes the Ukrainians say they've shot down more missiles than the Russians fired. So, the Ukrainians are basically lying a lot of the time anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Ataman, did you have anything to add to this subject?
No, it's definitely not my strong point. The only thing, the Franklin made a couple of comments a few minutes back.
Yep.
If you may, I'm going to read them.
Go for it.
The thing is that this is existential now. If the US loses this, the rest of the world is quickly moving on from the gay pretty quickly. I think that by the end of this decade, much of the world will be out from under the thumb of the gay. The gay will respond by being even more draconian. We're going to be caught behind a new iron curtain.
Yep.
Yeah, it's as someone else pointed out a little bit before that, Edwin Valance, that it's become a war of attrition. If indeed it has become a war of attrition, I think that's something Russia can probably outlast more than we can, the way we're engaged at the moment.
Well, Russia already had much bigger military stocks than the West ever had. Even the Americans, and the American military stocks are vastly more than the Brits or the Germans or the French or anyone else had. But the American military stocks were far lower than what the Russians had. I mean, I was talking to Don, who's an ex-US Marine artillery dude, and he was saying to me that the American artillery shell stockpiles are just set up for the sort of thing that the Russians do. You know,
No.
where they might fire 60,000 rounds in a week, for God's sake. You know, it's just, that's not what the West was ever set up to do. And of course, for the last 20 odd years, the Western armies have been more and more designed to fight counterinsurgency wars where you don't need massed artillery. All you need is a few very accurate guns to occasionally hit an isolated attack somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, some of the things we've been seeing a lot, like since the beginning of the war, not recently, but we saw, certain Baltic states trying to get uppity and close certain corridors. We saw recently, Ukraine and Poland with this missile. It's very much like the kid in the schoolyard acting up because his big brother's watching and he knows he's got his back. And some of this, I think, is testing the integrity of the current US regime to actually stand by their supposed allies. And I think in both instances, the US, even though these are really tiny instances, I think in both of these instances, the US has been a bit of a disappointment to its allies. It's kind of been quite oppressive to its so-called friends and not really been putting the boot into its so-called enemies.
Well, I mean, there's anyone on our side of the political divide, I mean, let's say broadly the dissident right, does anyone on the dissident right really think that it was the Russians who blew up the Nord Stream pipelines?
Well, no, but it might have been us.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're behind the Iron Curtain if one gets erected.
Yeah.
I mean, you can look at the comments that Boris made. Was it earlier this week where he said that actually most of the European countries weren't interested in backing Ukraine, and he was the one that sort of talked them around and sort of put his foot down and took the stance that he did.
I actually remember on the day that happened, turning around and saying that the Royal Navy and the Special Boat Service could have done that. I remember saying it on the day it happened in the Discord. Because, the Brits absolutely could have done it, but there's no way the Brits would have done it unless they were requested to do so by the Americans.
Mm.
Like, it wouldn't have been the Brits saying, "Oh, we'll do this off our own back," because the Brits don't have the Brits don't have the bottle to do stuff on their own now.
Yeah.
Chris wants to join. Chris, you need to connect your microphone, mate, or you can't join. It's saying your device is not connected, so I can't add you to the stream if you can hear this.
But yeah, so I mean, I kind of think that, like, I mean, admittedly, I'm more of a pleb view. I'm not some armchair general by any means, but from like quite early in the engagement, it looked like Russia was doing pretty well. Militarily, they've kind of, I think, dropped the ball in a few places, but like on the domestic front, they seem pretty all right compared to some places in Europe at the moment, or some places in Europe will be like over the coming year.
Well, I mean, ironically, they've been a lot more liberal than both Ukraine and what a lot of the other countries in Europe probably would have done at the time. I mean, I believe they've been more liberal than America was in the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
Well, the Russians have definitely been trying to limit civilian casualties, and it's made their job much harder in Ukraine. That's an absolute fact.
Oh, I also mean in terms of just like how they're managing the war on the home front.
Yeah, I mean, look, as far as I can see, people can criticize Putin in the Russian media, and fairly often do. But the criticisms that Putin seems to be getting are that he's not being tough enough for the most part.
On the whole, yeah. I hear the military is often not very happy with how the political and upper military leadership have actually been handling the whole thing as well, which is potentially a little bit of a dangerous situation if it goes on for too long.
Well, I mean, look, as far as I'm aware, and of course we're looking at this from the outside, but as far as I'm aware, the Russian military wanted to do that partial mobilization about 4 or 5 months before Putin actually agreed to it, which, obviously from a Russian point of view was a mistake. So, yeah.
I believe Strelkov was saying that basically all the way along. He was just I mean, that's part of why he was so pessimistic about the whole thing, even when Russia seemed to be doing really well, because he was saying, there's no way that this works out long term. There's just not the manpower there. You need to do mobilization right now. And I'm not even sure that he was talking about partial mobilization.
Absolutely, yeah. No, as I said, I still think probably by the end of the winter and certainly by the spring, I think Russia, one way or another, is going to win this. There are increasing rumors that the Americans are starting to put pressure on Ukraine to negotiate. And Ukraine at the moment is saying, nah, they won't at all. And they come out with ridiculous stuff like Russia's got to evacuate the Crimea, which is never going to happen, ever. And Russia, I don't think is ever going to evacuate the liberated republics either. So, I just think that Ukraine's out of its mind if it thinks it can get that sort of a peace settlement. It's not going to happen.
Well, the problem.
So what you're saying is that America wants to put the money laundering scheme on hold and Ukraine doesn't?
Maybe so it can transfer it to Taiwan or something. Yeah. Possibly.
Yeah.
Maybe. I just think, like as the Franklin's been saying in the chat, what's been going on here is more a signal of the regime in America's weakness than anything else. America is much weaker today than it was even 10, 15, 20 years ago. Much weaker. And if Ukraine does lose this war, which I think is almost inevitable, that is going to be another nail in the coffin of America as certainly as a world hegemon. But how long is she going to stay leader of the West in that way? Certainly in the way she is at the moment, where she can get Europe to cut her own throat deliberately. So,
Well, that's the thing too. Is like, I mean, they wouldn't even be embarrassed by it. They'll just do what they've done for the past many losses they've had whenever they've introduced themselves and intervened, where they'll just literally just cut their losses, cut away, and just pretend it didn't happen. Just it never happened.
Yep, absolutely. Just for people in the chat, Chris's sound quality is not very good, but he's driving to work. He's got overtime stuff to do today, so he's on the road. So that's why his sound quality is not as good as it normally is. All right, Chris, because I don't know how long we've got you, did you have a subject that you wanted to bring up?
Not off the top of my head. I literally just woke up and got straight on the road. So
all right, I'm going to bring up in a bit the Victorian State elections, where Dictator Dan Andrews actually didn't lose any seats whatsoever and remains in power. I was very black-pilled last night watching the Victorian State elections, but we'll talk about that in a bit. Rupert, did you have a first subject that you wanted to bring up this evening, mate?
The thing that I've seen most, well, the news item that's been sort of plastered around recently has been the latest report done about how the London fire service have been found to be heretics. I mean, bigoted or racist and whatever. I do wonder, what is the point in that scenario? Because you can see in the case of, like, I don't know, some office job or some like a position of very obvious power, even the police, you could say, it makes sense as to why they'd be doing that kind of coercion there from like a strategic perspective of like, okay, if we get our guys and are able to project our message into the police, then we can get more of our desired outcomes to be enforced via the law enforcement side of things. Or, obviously there's like power and prestige involved in a lot of other areas, like, I don't know, lawyering and all that kind of, and solicitoring and all that kind of thing. But the fire service is a bit of a weird one because it isn't necessarily the most prestigious job. It doesn't naturally lend itself towards the kind of people that they're usually trying to put into those positions. And it's kind of hard to see what they get out of it other than just delegitimizing and I don't know, it just seems like a power play for its own sake, and I can't imagine that it does anything other than just hurts the ability of the fire service to actually do its job. So, I don't know, am I missing something?
I remember looking into some figures like a year or so ago, and they basically showed that the little diversity that did exist in firefighters was almost entirely just in the office, and almost all, I think it was in the high 90ish% of all actual sort of on the ground firefighters were all sort of what you call white British, I suppose. Yeah, I don't know. It does just seem like institutional demoralization in a lot of ways. Like just can it kind of like if you look back at and there was that report about what's the name of that police report, the McPherson report. There was a good paper into that was called something pressure group politics or something. It was pretty damning. They kind of showed it out to be a giant sort of witch hunt, and of course that didn't like pave the way for the transformation into the police into a diverse institution. It just sort of cucked them essentially, and turned them into very much sort of just the enforcers of the therapeutic state and nothing more. I don't know. I don't know if that's, but to do that to the firefight to the fire brigade doesn't really serve the same utility. So, part of me thinks it is just humiliation.
Well, as you were talking, the only thing that did come to mind would be to be basically gaining another avenue for revenue generation of this whole industry. So the diversity and inclusion, what's called the industry such as it is, where you pay for all the diversity training and whatever. They were, I don't know, running short of money, so they decided that they'd do another high-profile attack on some like government institution or government-aligned institution or corporate institution, because they knew that there was the money there to bleed. So if they put all this very public pressure on, then they can just bleed some more money out of the fire service and out of the government.
They did the same thing here in Australia and in a few different states, but not so much in the case of racial diversity, but females and women in the firefighting crew. And their argument was, it was literally something along the lines of, when people are putting out fires, I want them to represent me. I'm a woman and I want to see women doing it too. It's like, what? You want your fire to be put out, don't you?
Well, I mean, also, if you're a 200-pound bloke, and increasingly these days a 200-pound woman, do you really want a little 90-pound wet woman trying to carry you from a burning building?
No.
I don't think I do.
She can carry the cat, but that's about it.
I mean, she might pick up like a little kid of like 8 or 9, and good luck to her, but a bloke will carry out anybody. And I don't know if it's true. I mean, in fact, I know it's not true today, but because they changed it when they allowed women to join to become firemen. It used to be true in the London Fire Brigade, for example, that you could not qualify as a fireman unless you could carry a bloke over your back in a fireman's carry for 100 yards running. And they changed that when they allowed women in, because women just can't do it.
Well, just one little interesting tidbit on this. I was just blasting through an article on it. And first off, it seemed like this whole investigation was done because some brown guy killed himself and claimed it was because of frequent targeted racist abuse.
That's right. I remember that.
Yeah, which I don't believe. But I was also kind of surprised because the review was done by Nazir Afzal, who was a chief prosecutor for somewhere up in the north, and it was to do with grooming gangs. And he kind of took the side along with Sajid Javid and a bunch of others, and essentially he kind of went against the grooming gangs, but he sort of lied like a lot and made up a lot of shit, and essentially sort of misdirected people essentially, and sort of grifted his way through the whole thing. So yeah. Already, I'm starting to see some big red flags here.
Yeah. I mean, as soon as you see people coming out about diversity on jobs which are about saving lives and where you have to have physical strength, and a fireman is one of those things where physical strength is a big advantage because you're trying to rescue people from burning buildings and often carry them down staircases and ladders and this kind of stuff.
I mean, this one here seems to be mostly focused on race, but
but if there hadn't already been the push to get women into those jobs, I very much doubt there would now be this problem with blokes. And like, as far as I know, like the London Fire Brigade, for example, years ago, I don't know about these days, but years ago, it was full of ex-servicemen. Like that was one of the jobs. If you were a soldier, a sailor, or an airman, after you did your service, you'd probably go and try and become a fireman because it was, it had some similar things about it. And the camaraderie and all this kind of story. And obviously there's a certain element of risk to it as well. So it used to attract those sort of people. But they're the sort of people you want doing that job, who are willing to put themselves into harm's way in order to save people. And women are obviously not as capable physically of doing those jobs. It's just a like common sense thing.
Yeah.
And if you didn't have already that stuff, and I know in Australia the same thing happened as in UK, and I'm sure, and I believe also in the US, when they started bringing women in, there was a huge controversy about it because they couldn't really do the job. And if you hadn't already had that, then I doubt you'd have this stuff now about race.
Yeah, no,
although, like there were black West Indian firemen, often former British soldiers, in the London Fire Brigade in the 1990s. All they had to do, but what kept some of those people out was the fire brigade used to require a pretty high maths test. I mean, not by a mathematician's thinking, but in terms of like average people, you had to have pretty high math skills. And the reason I know that is I did the test myself at one stage. Your maths had to be pretty damn good to get into the London Fire Brigade by ordinary average people's standards.
Did you pass the maths test?
No, I didn't, mate. That's why I didn't become a fireman. I hate maths. It's the one subject I detest. No, I passed all the physical stuff, but the maths test I failed. And that's why I never became a London fireman. So there you go.
Yeah, when I start homeschooling, I'm probably going to only make it up to grade 2 maths before I'm going to have to defer to someone else.
Yeah, maths is not my strong point. I'm not even going to pretend. But you did have to have a pretty high maths rating, and I would say that's probably what's kept out a lot of immigrant people from the fire services in the UK.
Can I say something about this?
Go for it, Franklin. Please do. And welcome, by the way.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Look, this isn't a particularly well thought out theory, so I'm sure it's full of holes. But I think aside from it just being about power and that kind of thing, I suspect that in some way they're realizing that a lot of the sort of female-dominated industries are actually not real industries, and in the long term, those industries are going to fall on their faces. Whereas these big pushes to get women into things like the fire brigade or into tradies and that sort of thing, even though they'll be doing nonsense jobs within there, they'll be able to sort of cynically piggyback off the guys who do the real work. And I think that it's a way for them to bail out of this sort of bullshit economy that they've built and try to get women into the real economy, if you like, even though they won't be doing the real jobs. I think that there's some sort of weird acknowledgement. They can't say it out loud, but I think there's some sort of weird acknowledgement that a lot of modern Western societies are built on a bullshit economy, and they need to get women out of that into the real economy.
So you think that in the way that they've kind of turned everything else into a jobs program, they're preparing the ground to turn these last few actual operating institutions into a jobs program as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think, and I think that they realize in some respect that a lot of these other office jobs or what have you just aren't real jobs. And
yeah, we're
probably
about this. Sorry.
We're probably heading towards this point. I think they can't say it out loud, but I think they think the West is actually heading to a major economic crisis, and they need to sort of head that off at the pass.
Yeah, we were talking about this last week. George brought it up because I did ask the question. I was asking, like, is this new move in the bust cycle of the corporate world where literally the first departments they axed were the female-centric ones, like HR departments and diversity inclusion departments, all that kind of bullshit. I asked, is that going to be sort of a change of cultural attitude towards female workmanship and trending back towards the apprenticeship trade style economy where things are actually produced to make money rather than just these time wasting, money sucking other managerial sort of feminine positions that we've sort of built an economy on.
I mean, that's the thing, is that if they're doing this cynically to try and worm their way into places where actual work is being done, then all it's doing is bringing those industries back down to the same level. If they then impose a scenario where for every actual firefighter you have to have an equal number of women who are all just sort of emailing each other and doing nothing else.
Yeah, yapping at you.
Of course, but I think we're at that stage in the cycle that we're in the sort of diluting phase or the collapse phase of the cycle. And some of it's ideological, but I think some of these people actually know what's going on, and they realize that things are going to get worse. So they need to preempt that. They need to get women into these other things before they all lose their jobs in HR.
There's another way to look at this, though, I think, and that is that the trades, and tradies as they're called in Australia, were perhaps the last bastion of male-dominated work, and maybe it's just like, let's make that not blokes too. Maybe there's an element of that in it too, because there's definitely this element of pushing traditional blokes out of everything that they've ever done.
There's definitely some resentment in it, I mean,
yeah.
The new generation of sort of thought leaders on their side of things have actually grown up with this idea of patriarchy to such an extent that they really do believe it. They are true believers in every sense of the word.
I think like there are feminists who really believe it, who are not the brightest tools in the shed, but they really believe it. But I don't think for a minute our globo homo corporate globalist overlords believe it. I think they know better, but
I think half of the new academics that you'll find. I think half the new academics you'll find at like your average run-of-the-mill mid-tier university definitely believe it.
Oh yeah, those guys do, but I don't think they're the brightest tools in the shed. But I'm saying the guys actually in charge politically, I don't think those guys believe it. I think they use it for evil purposes. Evil is the only word I can use.
I think that's definitely part of it, but I suspect that smart people behind the scenes realize that this game is rapidly coming to a close, and probably a nightmare scenario for them would be for all of the industries that they control to sort of fall in a heap, and then for there to be these other industries that might sort of carry on that they wouldn't control. That would potentially represent a rival power base, and it would. And a lot of this is about patronage. They have to provide jobs for their supporters, and that means that they're going to have to get them into things that are going to be resilient, I suppose.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Look, I don't want to go into this now, frankly, because in a minute we're going to talk a little bit about the Australian state elections. The rape victims voting for their rapist. Yeah, I think there is an element that, when the tradies went against Dan Andrews and Dan Andrews turned the anti-terrorist police against them, that was mostly because they were ordinary, average, working class family blokes trying to support their families. And you can't have that.
Well, that's right. The biggest danger to any regime is going to be sort of smart, well-informed, organized, energetic young men. And you want to, from the perspective of a sort of despotic regime, you want to neutralize those guys because they're always going to be the first to rebel against you. So if you can bring in a whole lot of other people who are less inclined to rebel,
Yeah.
then
Women,
you have less chance of
for
rebellion.
example. Women,
Yes,
for
that's right.
example. Yes,
Yes, and
absolutely.
people who are not as sort of, they don't have the sort of inclination towards the whole kind of Anglo tradition of marching upon one's superiors when things get a little bit out of hand. They definitely don't want that.
The kulaks
Also-
are their biggest enemy and biggest threat.
Also, more
Yeah.
fundamentally, it's you don't necessarily need to take it to blood because, I mean, a lot of these people are often still patriots, but they're just not patriots for the country that they're in. They're patriots for the country they're from. So you know how all the Turks will quite happily vote left or for whoever promises them the most goodies over in Germany, but then or in the Netherlands. But then when it comes to voting in their own elections, they'll vote quite hard right.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree with any of that stuff. All right, but just to move us along a bit, unless anyone has anything to add to that subject on the plan.
No.
Rupert, have we covered that as far as you're concerned?
Yeah, I mean, very good discussion. I don't know that there's much more blood we can draw out of that stone.
All right, Ataman, did you have a first subject for this evening?
Yeah, I have.
Go on.
BBC Yorkshire announced that Rotherham is set to become the world's first children's capital of culture. 2025.
Oh my God. The irony. The
Yeah.
irony.
I'm sorry.
And of course, that's entirely coincidental, of course, to the fact that it's the very hub of the grooming gang scandal.
Well, there's a little video of it, and they're all saying like, "Oh, Rotherham's got a bad reputation, a bad past." It's like, okay, are you going to talk about it? No, they just keep saying, "Oh, it's got a bad reputation. It's got a bad. We need to move on from the bad reputation." And it's just, I don't know. It's there's something really quite grotesque about it because they still haven't really they haven't sorted that issue out at all.
Sorry, what did they call it? Children's capital of culture? Is that what you said?
Yeah,
Yeah.
children's capital.
So
of culture,
it'll be the children's capital of culture for Pakistani kids. No problem.
yeah, basically.
Well, it certainly won't be for white children and to a much lesser degree Hindu children, but
Well, it'll be the capital when the children are treated as capital, is what they mean.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's
even
pretty
the grooming gang thing. Like, we all know grooming gang means child rape gang. Basically, that's what it means.
Yeah.
But you're not allowed to say that because if you say it, and I mean, even me saying this on this stream puts me in danger of getting a strike. So
Well, I mean, funny
Can't tell
enough,
the
me as a man of the right, I've been accused of using the term grooming gang to undermine the issue there. And it's like, well, hang on a minute, you were the guys that invented that term and threw it around because you did want to undermine the issue going on there.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Calling it the grooming gang is definitely just softening it to the maximum degree. Like,
Yeah.
as you said, Duke, it's a child rape mafia fucking syndicate. That's all it is.
Little kids as young as 11 and 12. Little girls as young as 11 and 12. That's what we're really talking about, which you're not allowed to talk about. You're literally not allowed to talk about it.
Yeah.
But you see, Duke, that in Pakistan, they're considered women, don't you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I take your point. But we have to be very careful what we say because, like I said, Chris, YouTube is not a free speech platform. Trust me. We don't even have an Elon Musk coming into YouTube. So however
It's
good.
okay. I love the nation of Pakistan, and I love
Me too.
I love Savage Javid.
Yep, me too. And everything we say is in Minecraft, Susan. You know that. But it's just insane. And the idea of making that the capital of children is like, it's a sick joke. It's a sick joke, is what it really is.
Yeah, I mean, I saw someone suggest, and it did make me worry. Like, to what extent are they actually just also using this to completely obscure, any instance of you being able to look into what actually happened in that town? Yeah, because you won't be able to, for example, I'm sure, give it a year and you won't be able to Google like Rotherham, child grooming scandal or anything like that without just bringing up references and information about, because we live in an age of data and algorithms now. So
Yep. Yeah. I mean, do a search on Google or DuckDuckGo or any of these search engines, and you'll see how many hundreds of thousands of references come up, but you'll only end up with like a dozen pages at most of anything. What do you think happens to the rest of it? It's not shown. And of course, the stuff you get, as all of us know when we've tried to do internet searches, the stuff you get is inevitably biased towards the liberal left and global homo. It just always is. And it doesn't matter which search engine you use, they're all the same.
yeah.
It's like we don't get this. As Ellen Hutter 1838 is saying in the chat, it's a far right in inverted commas conspiracy, of course. Yeah, sure, of course it is.
Yeah, I mean, this other myth sort of reared its head again. This was a while back, but Priti Patel had the grooming gang report released, and of course the Home Office sort of doctored it quite extensively, so that the line that got released, that the Guardian and places like that ran with, which was that white men were the group most likely to be prolific in grooming gangs.
Amazing when the vast
in child
majority.
sexual crimes.
Amazing when the vast majority of men in the UK are white, isn't it?
The thing is, I'm not even sure if that's even really true. They admit themselves in the report that the data's bad, but of course, if you look at where the data is the worst, it's the worst in towns that are known for having prolific Pakistani rape gang problems.
Yeah.
So to be honest, I think if they had the better data set that they claim that they want, I think they'd find that even that wouldn't end up being true.
I mean, the data might even be good, but it's a pretty classic trick to just widen or narrow the scope of what you're talking about until it fits the point that you're trying to make, and then you have to really get into the weeds to see like what they're actually referring to.
Am I right, Ataman or Rupert? You might know. I don't think they've even ever so far released the full report, have they? The official report on the grooming gangs that was done, where they sacked the first chick who was doing it because she was from New Zealand and a bit too strict, and put someone else in who would be a bit more lax, i.e. in favour of mass immigration, etc. I don't think that whole report has ever been released still, has it?
I'm not sure. They said that this one was the report, but then there was talk about the fact that it still wasn't the full report. I'm not sure, but I mean the report they released there wasn't really much to it, to be honest.
And they released it in bits, and like I say, I'm pretty sure they never have released the entire report because they said it wouldn't be in the public interest, which of course means that Anglo-Celtic people in the UK might have got a bit too angry.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. You don't get this from Canada, but then I don't know whether Canada's immigration is the same as. I mean, I know it's as bad as the UK's, and in fact worse in some ways. But I don't know if it comes from the same countries, and the same thing with Australia. Because otherwise, I would think you would get the same thing happening in those countries too.
Yeah, I mean the thing is we have this group here, which is these sorts of because people will say like Muslims or of course the state says Asian, but they're Pakistani, and they're not just Pakistani. They're also from sort of particular very rural areas of Pakistan where they're very tribalistic.
You're being a bit too generous, I think, actually, because there was a more recent case where I can't remember if it was either Afghans or Somalians that had been brought over as refugees to Glasgow, and it took them something something less than 6 months to set up a rape gang up there themselves.
Oh, yeah, I probably am being too generous.
Yeah, I would think that's probably true, to be honest with you, Ataman. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Biaki in the chat here is right, but it's certainly possible.
Mm.
It's certainly possible. But yeah, I mean, the Pakistanis are particularly bad. The Bangladeshians, which used to be East Pakistan, is not much better. So I mean, you know.
Yeah.
So look. The idea of making that the capital of children's culture to me is a sick joke. But I mean, you know, I'm one of these people who thinks that transvestite story hour is a sick joke, and allowing little kids of sometimes as young as like 5 to decide that they're a different sex is also a sick joke. But I mean, you know, we seem to live in the time of sick jokes, sadly.
I just can't tell necessarily whether it's malicious and somebody's doing it like we said, to mess with search terms and things like that to muddy the picture, or if it's just some gormless bureaucrat's idea of trying to rehabilitate the image of Rotherham, and they thought that it was a good idea to try and break the association through like with a very ham-fisted attempt to kind of prove the opposite or something.
Yeah.
You might be right, Rupert, but I think you're being, like Ataman was a minute ago, I think you're being a bit too generous.
That's a very charitable interpretation, granted, yes.
It is. All right, my first subject to bring up, unless anyone else has anything to add on that.
I'll be right back.
All right. Unless anybody has anything else to add on that, my first subject is going to be sports ball as brainwashing. I haven't watched any of the World Cup. I hope England get knocked out as soon as possible, because they take the knee to Black Lives Matter before every game, so therefore they're not English as far as I'm concerned, let alone the fact that actually I don't think the team's actually even half Anglo-Celtic, so as far as I'm concerned they're not English anyway. This is the good thing about it is I think it's woke up quite a lot of normies. There's a lot of ordinary football fans who have been watching the World Cup and saying, hang on, this is more about propaganda and we're really bad if we're white and straight than anything else. What do you guys think about that one? We won't take a long time on this, but what do you guys think about that?
No, I think the football fans will swallow their slop ultimately.
Well, this is not what I'm hearing from people in the Discord. People in the Discord are telling me about fathers and grandfathers who are not political and are very normie who have been noticing this. They've been noticing they've been noticing the anti-white, anti-straight white male propaganda that's coming out and getting annoyed with it too.
I don't know. I mean, I work with a lot of normies, and they don't. To me, they don't seem to be particularly caring about that at all. You know, they're just kind of watching it as they always do. I suppose it does depend on the crowd, though. I mean, this one has been particularly bad. They had a sketch on Last Leg where they were singing about gay rights in Qatar or something.
Was that with that Adam Hill character?
I think so, yeah.
Christ.
I mean, look, this is, generally, we were just talking about some bad Muslim stuff. But actually, I'm entirely on Qatar's side on most of this stuff that's going on at the moment in Qatar.
Well, I was, but then they turned around and banned the guys wearing the Crusader uniforms, and now I'm full English football hooligan mode.
Oh, look, I've never been against English football hooligans, basically, because, English football hooligans is kind of a traditional thing up to a point. But, all of the anti-gay stuff, I'm on Qatar's side. I really am.
Yeah, we need to join forces with our original Muslim enemies, but we need to make them our Muslim brothers temporarily to crush the trannies.
Yeah, I mean, I'd ally with most people to crush the Chinese, but there we go. But yeah, it's. I just think that there's been more propaganda in this World Cup than there has been football.
Isn't part of the problem also for FIFA and these sort of globalist organizations that to have any kind of legitimacy, they have to bring the rest of the world into things, and the rest of the world is sort of anti-gay. So that they've kind of painted themselves into a corner, because either they have to bow to all these activists in the West who are saying, well, Qatar never should have got it. So the list of sort of approved countries would basically just be Western, in which case the rest of the world's going to say, well, how is this an international thing then? I think that's what they're running up against on a whole lot of issues, whether it's this or the Ukraine war or anything else, that the West is increasingly shrill about, pardon me, well, everyone should do what we do, but it's actually, pardon me, but it's actually an international affair.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of
yeah. Sorry,
I was just going to say, a lot of people argue that that domestically the West will put a lot of these groups back in the box. You know, the black and browns, the troons, the whatevers, the alphabet people. I mean, I don't really see how they can. So it's going to kind of come to a point where they will have to choose between these domestic groups or their international partners, and they're going to pick the domestic groups. And as you say, just keep shortening that list of which countries are acceptable to go to and hold events with, and include in the envelope, and which ones they don't.
But at some point, the rest of the world is just going to reject all of these things. They're just going to say, well, why? This is not whenever in the past when the West did dominate the world. They're going to say the West, whether you're talking about the population or the share of GDP or anything else, is not what it once was. We want representation. We don't want the West sort of throwing its weight around telling all of us about its values being universal human rights. We reject that notion. And I don't think that these Western governments and so on are actually going to be able to square that circle.
I think you make a good point, Franklin. It's like the Western governments are going against the majority of their ordinary average own people. So like most Anglo-Celtic people in Britain or Australia or even Canada, I suspect, or even New Zealand, are still basically in line with what most of the rest of the world thinks. But what the Western gay leadership is trying to do is to like pretend that we believe this shit when only some of our elites do. Most of our ordinary people don't.
I disagree with you about that. I mean, I think when we get onto the Victorian election, one of the big takeaways there is that, except out where I live, there's no appetite really for the right. I mean, Melbourne is unbelievably paused, and that the state election would seem to suggest that. I think maybe in some places where the concentration of the population is not really focused on a major city, but anywhere where a major city dominates the population, as it does in Victoria and some other states, I think Western Australia is like that, South Australia is like that, and other parts of the world. I actually don't think most people are very right wing.
Well, I'm not sure, Franklin. Do you know what proportion of the Melbourne and Victoria writ large's population is Chinese, and has it grown in the past 4 years?
Well, but I mean, they've had these weird situations, like in Box Hill. They actually had a Chinese woman running against. I'm pretty sure this guy's Jewish. He doesn't look Anglo to me, and his family name's sort of a bit dubious. But even in that area, the Liberals ran a Chinese Malaysian woman, and they still got done like a dinner compared to someone who's not Chinese in a Chinese electorate. I think Melbourne's just really far gone. And it was also the case in several of the western suburbs. The Liberal Party was actually running Indians in heavily Indian areas, and they lost to white women, I believe, in
Interesting.
Indian areas. Yeah, look, it's just I think that it's big cities. They're just, and that's where most people in Australia reside. They don't live out where I live. They live in big cities, and I mean they're like foreign countries now. I actually think that Duke is wrong on this. I don't think that the majority, and certainly people under the age of 40, I think the average person in a big city under the age of 40 is really left wing now. They're not traditional at all. So I vehemently disagree with Duke on that point, actually.
All right, look, guys, we're going to talk about this in a sec. And I would just point out, Chris is like a guy from far north Queensland. So far north Queensland's quite a bit different from Victoria, as you know, frankly. But I just want to ask the other people on the panel what they think about the World Cup, and then we'll move on to that subject as our actually not our end subject, our second end subject, because I want to talk about the 500,000 legal immigrants who came into UK this year, which is a record, and that's a net figure. So anyway, so anyone else have anything to say on the World Cup story? Mitch, Ataman, Rupert?
No, nothing from me.
Yeah, not really. I mean, it's mostly just a pressure valve for vital energy. So
yeah, I mean, in terms of World Cup, in terms of how we slag off the normies, I just think, okay, it's all well and good having to go up the normies, like taking up this guy slop in the form of the World Cup and whatnot, but it's one of the few vestiges of community we've got left, the whole football fan community. So it's like, we can't really slag off them and expect them to just dump it all, but then provide them nothing to replace it. So that's my tuppence on it.
Yeah, I see your point, Mitch. But honestly, man, I mean, what is there about this England team to support as like an actual real Englishman? What is? I mean, half the team ain't English, and they kneel before every single match in submission to Black Lives Matter. How can you support that as an Englishman? I just can't. I'm sorry.
I mean, on one hand, I can understand when people say, "Oh well," even if they don't like the posing of a team, they just think, "Oh well, I'll just try and watch it and enjoy it best I can because I just want to depolitic." I can understand people on the right saying that, like, you know, like what you remember that Royal Oak video back in the Euros?
Yep.
That's the video I'm thinking of, like the whole. Oh yeah, like half the England team aren't actually really English, and yeah, accept your point. On the other hand, it's also, you know, short, like, but then Royal Oak will say, like, oh, could we take a break from politics to support as best we could and just not think about politics too much? I don't know.
The most popular stream I ever did, Mitch, were two actually against supporting England in the Euros because of that kneeling shit.
Yeah.
They're the ones that have the most views on my channel.
Yeah, so on the topic, I was going to say, on the topic of the kneeling, I still don't get why the England team are doing it, because even the Americans are just like, why are you still doing this? Like, it's been 2.5 years.
Weren't you embarrassed when you watched England play America and the Americans were standing up straight like men and the English guys were on their knee?
Yeah.
Like, to me, I just can't watch that. It makes me feel physically sick.
I mean, the main thing I was focusing on is, okay, so the Anglos are all fucking kneeling, but the Americans are all standing, and they're all just like, okay, it's been 2.5 years since the great Black Hope, shall we say, since he got taken away to death or whatever. But then, and it's just like, okay, why are we still kneeling for this guy 2.5 years after he's kicked the bucket? Yeah. And he's not even mad. I mean, you don't even have to go into the whole, you know, oh, well, he was, what is it? Was he attempted rapist or something? Like he robbed a pregnant woman's home or something?
Yes,
like
he did, and put a gun into her pregnant belly,
I
and she was a
don't
black
think that's
woman.
true, but he was with people that did.
Yeah, apparently I heard, I don't know if it's true, Armand, but what I heard was he actually stuck a gun into a pregnant black woman's belly when he was robbing her.
No, I'm pretty sure he didn't have a gun, but he was with a gang, and someone in the gang did do that when they were robbing a house together.
All right, so he was an all right guy then, I think.
That's not what I'm saying, and you know.
No, I know you're not, man. I know you're not. I'm sorry, Armand. Forgive me. I just get fed up with these damn people. I really do.
Yeah.
But I mean, like I said, as far as I'm concerned, Englishmen don't kneel to anybody, and English teams that kneel. I mean, let alone, like I said, at least half the English team, as far as I'm concerned, it's not English anyway. But English teams that kneel, I'm never going to support them, man. Never, never, never. Because it's like totally un-English to do that. And it's embarrassing and it makes me feel ill.
Mm.
I just don't understand any Englishman who can overlook that. I'm sorry. Like, that's completely beyond me to overlook that. I've never been a huge football fan because I've always thought it was a gay game. People rolling over in the penalty area every time someone's foot comes within 6 inches of their leg. But I used to be an enormous cricket and rugby union fan, and I stopped doing that for exactly the same reasons. I don't support those teams anymore because of the kneeling and the forced diversity. I don't follow any of it anymore. Like, I used to love the Ashes. The Ashes used to be like almost religious to me because it was a family battle between England and Australia that went on since the 1880s. And it was totally ruined by bringing in all this nonsense that had nothing to do with England or Australia. I'm pretty much like all the history the BBC put out today, which has nothing to do with England, really.
My favourite part about the LGBT messaging in sports and football and stuff is take American football for example. How they did the gypsy switch and said yes, football is in fact gay. Football is gay. Yes, pride. We are gay. Like yes, football's gay. We know. Sorry.
Oh, look, my younger brother was an enormous football fan, and he used to support Millwall and Tottenham, and travel around the country supporting them. But like I don't know, man. I think if he looked at football today, he would detest it because it's everything he was not. It's like gay and feminine and not at all blokey at all. It's absolutely anti that, and it's turning the people who support the England football team today into these gay, homosexual, tranny supporting types. That's what they're doing, and that is why they're doing it. Because it is, and it's doing it almost subliminally to a lot of these soccer fans who are not all that bright.
Yeah, the sports teams and their management behaviour isn't really reflecting the sort of hooliganism that sits underneath them. Like, I'm reminded of the guy that took on the was it the London Bridge stabbers, like the terrorist guys going around stabbing people, and that guy was like, "Fuck you, I'm Millwall," and then headbutts him.
Yep.
He gets stabbed, but he still took them on.
Yeah, the guy who was using chairs and stuff to fight against these blokes who he thought had bombs strapped to their chest. They didn't. They were fake, but he didn't know that. But yeah.
The guy comes out as a Millwall supporter, and then the press acts shocked when a couple of weeks later it turns out he's like racist. It's like, it's kind of part of the course if you're a Millwall supporter.
Yeah, like I said, my younger brother was a Millwall supporter, and the only couple of soccer games I went to in the UK were Millwall, because that was when my dad used to go. And I was never a Millwall supporter. I don't really care about football, to be honest with you, because like I say, I always thought it was a bit gay. But absolutely, Millwall were not known for being diverse at all. It's a fucking inner South London soccer team, you know. Where in the days when there were still real inner South London Cockney type blokes, you know, it's like I don't know, man. You know, all the ones who now live in Essex or Kent or whatever they do. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, give me that kind of Millwall support any day of the week, mate. Because like when I was a kid and I grew up in like inner South London, in Bermondsey and all around that area where Millwall supporters come from, which used to be a dock area on the south side of Tower Bridge. Women and kids could walk around perfectly safely in that area. Were there fights in the pubs? Yeah, there absolutely were fights in the pubs. But it was blokes, you know. But by and large, women and children could walk around there at midnight and nothing bad would ever happen to them. Because it was Anglo culture, you know.
Yeah.
Totally different story. You know, if there was a little kid lost in the street, there'd be all these women and even blokes coming up and trying to find, we'll find your mum, you know. If there was a woman crying on the street, there would be all these women and blokes coming up and saying, oh, what's your problem, love, you know. Totally different story to what it is today, where the whole of South London is basically alien to England and London. It's aliens.
Yeah, now they all move down here. Fucking
You're
harass us
right.
Southerners.
You're right, Armin. Absolutely right. A lot of like my dad ended up moving to to West Sussex. You know, he moved a lot further than most people. He moved right to the coast.
Yeah.
But my dad had 6 brothers and sisters, and my dad was born in 1933, and he was the last one to leave London. All of them left London. There you go, the Laureus. Totally true. Bermondsey was pretty rough back then, mind. It was. You could walk into a pub and get your face punched in if you did the wrong thing. You could. Only as a bloke, though. Women and kids, never had an issue there at all. And you know what? In some ways, I think as a bloke, having to be more careful is not a bad thing. Because if you were not an asshole, you weren't going to get your face punched in unless you were very unlucky. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean that's always been the case, and even among friends, good friends, as much as I hate to invoke him, but Jordan Peterson, he said that really well. It's like underneath every sort of male interaction, no matter how friendly, there's always a threat of violence that sits underneath at all times. It's just life. It's just how it is.
And that's a male thing. And it holds some blokes in check. You know, it's a good natural thing that holds some blokes in check. You know, you won't. This is why the internet is like the ridiculous thing it is because you can say what you like on the internet. And even if you really, really, really fuck someone off, they can't punch you. Which is why people say things on the internet they would never say in real life.
And of course, all the men now, like all the boys, have been feminized and have been raised in a female-centric sort of way. Because I mean, women obviously never have that sitting underneath when they're talking to each other. I mean, you might get scrappy chav chicks going at it. Here and there, but for the most part, it's not. They're not modulating each other's behaviour by the fact that the potential for violence could happen, unlike men. But like we've sort of lost that as well, because now the threat of like litigation and repercussions like that is always hanging over our heads too. So it's like, so you can't even really enter into that kind of dynamic anymore. So we've just been emasculated.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't disagree with that at all. Anyone else got anything to add to that, or we'll move on to our next subject, which is the Victorian State elections in Australia?
No, I'm good.
Mitch, anything to add?
No, I can't say that I do.
All right, I think we've probably covered that as much as we can, and I do agree that like it's all part of this feminization of society and pretending that everything masculine is toxic masculinity, which it's not. It's an important part of civilization.
And I'll just add one last thing. You're exactly right. And I mean, I get called a woman hater for saying this sort of stuff, but I mean, when you think about all of the problems that we're seeing now, it's all related to this obsession with empathy and trying to help people and trying to make everyone comfortable and save all the poor refugees. And it's all about, it's everything that we're facing now is all a result of this feminine, like over empathic, like the terrible mother, the mother that won't let go of her kid, like this. Yeah, it's just it's saturating our society at the moment, and yeah, we need to return to masculinity.
I don't know if you're old enough, Chris, and I don't know if any of the people on the panel are old enough to remember this, but like when I was a young man, like, I don't know, 18, 19, 20, and was drinking in pubs and stuff like this, if two blokes had a fight, no one was calling the police. Unless they smashed something. If they went outside and had a fight,
classing each other.
No, if they went outside and had a fight, no one was calling the cops. These days, two blokes have a fight and immediately the cops get called and everyone gets arrested. And I think that's absolutely how it is. And it is. It's the feminization of society. Why does anyone care about two blokes having a fight? Why does that affect anyone else? It doesn't. I mean, like I said, if you had a fight in the pub and you smashed things, yeah, all right, the publican's going to call the cops, no problem. But if two blokes go outside, and when I was a young kid, that's what used to happen. Someone would say, "All right, let's go outside, mate," you know.
I mean that was all well and good when we were ethnically homogenous. Culture, but you know, you get the instance today where, say, like a Lebanese fella or someone gets in a biffo with a white fella. It's just like, no, that's not going to end at that. He's going to come back with 20 of his mates and gang bash him later.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, all right. There is an ethnic side to that. There is. Like there used to be this Anglo-Celtic idea of a fair fight, which was never quite as honourable as it sounds. But there was this idea of a one-on-one fight, and everyone else would not get involved. But yeah, absolutely. But it's the feminization of society. There is no reason why two blokes can't have a fight on their own and not smash any property up. Why you need to call the police? There's no reason to do that. Really. I mean, if no one's using a weapon, why do you need to call the cops? Men fight. Men get in fights. It's just what happens. And as soon as you get to a situation that we're in now, where two blokes having a fight is an immediate, like, emergency call, and the cops all have to arrive, and everyone gets arrested, that is anti-natural.
It's okay. They can sidestep that because the police over in England, you know, they'll ask something like, well, does one of them have a pride flag on them? No. Okay, we're not coming. We got better things to do. Sorry.
Yeah, maybe.
We're out policing tweets. All right, leave us alone.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I mean, to me, it was also like, you know, once Australian pubs had a thing that if you're drunk, we won't serve you. Why do people go to pubs? They go to pubs to drink alcohol. So if they think you're drunk, they won't serve you. I'm sorry, I don't get it. I just don't get it. I'm sorry. The whole point of going to a pub used to be to get drunk. It did. But yeah, all right, whatever, I guess. All right, I think we've covered that enough. Victorian State elections, as far as I'm concerned, the Victorian State elections, where Dan Andrews, I don't think, lost any seats, proves that you in Victoria can turn Victoria into an actual police state, and I'm not exaggerating. He turned Victoria into a police state that was well up there with the Chinese Communist Party, and he didn't lose any seats. So it's basically
He did lose seats. He lost a few.
Oh, did he? How many?
Yeah. Hang on, let me just have a look here. They lost one to the Liberals in Nepean, and they've lost one to the Greens in Richmond. There's still several seats in doubt. So
Right,
they gained.
so the Greens
they
in
gained
Richmond is nothing because that's pro-Labor.
Yeah, but they gained 2 seats from the Liberals and they lost 1 seat to Liberals. So they actually picked up. They had a net gain of 1 seat, but they did actually lose a seat to the Liberals.
Oh yeah. So they lost 1 seat to the Liberals and gained 1 from the Liberals, so no change.
No, they gained 2. No, they gained 2 from the Liberals. So they're up 1.
Okay.
They gained Bayswater and Glen Waverley, and they lost Nepean.
So you're saying Andrews is actually up on what he was before rather than down?
Well,
given
there's still several seats.
given the Greens are Andrews' votes, basically.
It's hard to say. There's still several seats in doubt, and it depends on which way those go. Actually, it's too hard to say it. But just on the results we have, they've picked up 2 and lost 1 to the Liberals, and they've lost 1 to the Greens. There's several that are in doubt still with the Greens. And then in the countryside, there have been 3 gains for the Nationals against Independents.
That's probably a good thing.
Yeah, I mean the Nationals are just sort of like they're sort of a norm. Their supporters are very much normies. And the interesting thing about the Nationals is basically the more rural the electorates, the more Nationals they are.
Yeah.
But even the ones that they've picked up have been just over the line. Basically, the more densely populated, the more left wing any electorate is essentially.
Yeah, look, I absolutely, I don't disagree with any of that. But like, as far as I'm concerned, any seats Andrews has lost to the Greens, he hasn't lost because, like, basically, Labour and the Greens are in total conjunction. The only thing the Greens will do is drag Andrews even more left.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't get it. I mean, look, for anyone in the chat who is not Australian or in Victoria, Dan Andrews turned Victoria into a police state, very much on the lines of the Chinese Communist Party. You could be arrested for traveling further than he allowed you to travel. You could be arrested as a pregnant mother and handcuffed in front of your kids in your home for a social media post. You could be an Australian military veteran and have your front door bashed in by the Victorian police and be arrested for a social media post. You could be a little old lady in her 80s and be bashed to the ground by Victoria police. And after your head hit the floor, not 1 but 2 Victorian policemen would pepper spray into your face from about 6 inches away. And that could be filmed, and that was all right too. Or you could be a hardworking Australian tradie, a tradesman, and be protesting that Dan Andrews had stopped you working to protest his family, to like feed your family. And he would set loose on you the anti-terrorist police of the Victorian cops with armoured vehicles and tear gas and rubber bullets. And Andrews has just won the election with no losses, really.
Did you expect differently?
Oh, yeah, I actually thought he would. I thought he might win, but I thought he would win narrowly. Not like he has actually won, which is like fairly convincing. But
yeah, I was more cynical, I suppose. I mean, it clearly is popular in Melbourne. I mean,
you spend any time in these cosmopolitan fucking areas, and you soon realise that
you're breaking up, Chris. It's probably because you're travelling. Look, I absolutely agree. Melbourne, I knew he'd win in Melbourne because of all the soy boys and the feminists in Melbourne. I knew he would win there. What I'm surprised at is that he won in outer Melbourne suburbs.
There was a bit of a swing against the ALP in the outer west and outer northwest, but the eastern and southeastern suburbs, yeah, it's. I mean, people like him. This is an
How
endorsement.
can you
of
like Dictator Dan? He's one of the most hateful people you've ever met.
Just
looking at
fundamental.
him and listening to him.
Yeah, he's such a fundamentally unlikable, sniveling little creature.
I'm
yet-
sorry,
and yet people
frankly,
voted
look,
for
I
him.
like you, mate, but honestly, how can anyone like Dictator Dan?
Well, I don't
It
know.
just can't
Evidently,
work
they
out.
do. I mean, I'm not saying. Look, I voted informal. I didn't vote for him, but evidently he's popular. That's people need to come to terms with that somehow, and that in the areas that once were sort of blue ribbon Liberal seats, they're now fighting for their lives against an assortment of Greens and Teals and all of the rest of them. I don't know. He's popular. I don't understand it, but he's popular.
Yeah, I just don't get it, frankly. And honestly, it's like he's one of the most hateful, in inverted commas, men I've ever seen. He used to come on TV almost every night when Melbourne was the most locked down place in the entire world, saying what a wank he was. And now we now have the evidence that first of all, the China virus came out of a lab. We know that now, pretty much. We also know it was nowhere near as deadly as they claimed. And we also know that the vaccines that Dan Andrews is still trying to force on people kill more people than the bloody China virus did. We know that now, and none of it penetrated to the ordinary voters. I just don't get it, mate. I don't, honest. I don't understand how thick people... Do they not watch anything except the mainstream media?
Evidently not, and it's years since the mandates were brought in, and to some extent, life has gone back to normal. People are traveling and doing all of that sort of stuff, so they have very short memories.
I'm just amazed, mate. Honestly, last night I was so black-pilled about this stuff, and I get it. All right, Australia has a relatively complicated electoral system where you have to look where your preferences go, and I reckon at least 50% of Australians never really look at that.
No, I think we have this sort of mythology around it's because it's compulsory to vote, it's your civic duty, blah, blah, blah. The civic duty evidently only doesn't extend to actually doing any research, because people go to the polls and get the how to vote cards. And another thing is, it's actually really important the order in which people are listed on the ballot, because if you're top of the ballot, some people will just do a donkey vote, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like that down the ballot. But we have this whole mythology around, well, we have compulsory voting and it's your civic duty and blah, blah, blah. I don't think the average person has any idea what's going on. But that's... we're going to have to come to terms with that on the right, because as we saw recently with the American midterms, and we've seen with other things also, evidently people are that brain dead that they're going to keep voting these guys back in. I don't think there was too much shenanigans here in terms of electoral politics.
No.
I think people, they just have Stockholm syndrome.
There was a lot of early voting, though, Franklin. Like in my constituency, I believe there was more early voting than there was on the day voting. And
I think that's
I'm suspicious of that always.
Yeah, look, I think the simpler explanation is that it's just people in Melbourne. They're just really fucked in their head. Yeah, and the fact that there are all these very wealthy suburbs that once were considered blue ribbon Liberal seats that are up for grabs for Teals and Greens and so on. I actually don't know what the future of the Liberal Party is going to be, both at the state, well, certainly at the state level, but increasingly at the federal level. I don't.
They had a bad campaign, the Franklin. Would you not agree? I mean, in fact, did they have a campaign at all? Really, the Liberals, I mean.
Yeah, but they're caught between a rock and a hard place because they had all these sort of scandals where they were talking about sort of religious conservatives trying to infiltrate the party, and that's sort of anathema to the what would you call them, the people who just vote Liberal for economic reasons. I
don't get that because I'm an agnostic. Okay, I used to be an atheist. I'm not anymore. I'm an agnostic, but I think conservative Christians are fine because they're mostly right-wing.
Yeah, but most Australians don't think that way. They really do think that they're a bunch of lunatics who want to turn it into the The Handmaid's Tale. They really do think that. Tons of people. That's why they're voting for Teals and Greens in these actually quite wealthy electorates in the sort of vaguely inner city. And even there's one, I don't know if you're aware of this one, but in what's the name of that? Polwarth or Polgarth or something. It's just outside Geelong. It's on the coast there, so it takes in some very wealthy areas. I'll just find the name of it. I actually, when I was back at uni, I vaguely knew the person they sort of parachuted in for the ALP. So this is a really wealthy area, and it's sort of vaguely countryish as well. The ALP parachuted in someone they were touting as she was going to be the first Muslim Middle Eastern LGBT candidate if she got elected. I mean, and she only missed, and she was from outside the area they parachuted her in, and she only just lost in that area, which is like, it's an area where all of the rich people in Melbourne have their holiday houses and so on. Why are those people voting for people like that? Like, she got almost 30% of the primary vote.
I'm just it's insane to me. I mean, like, the suburb I live in is at least 90% owner occupiers. Like, the people own their homes, and it's a long way out of Melbourne, and they voted for Labor. I just don't get it. It's like beyond me.
Yeah, well, I think for those who like Dan Andrews, who are not sort of hardcore leftists, they perceive him as getting stuff done. I mean, I don't know. I don't follow that closely enough to know if he actually does get stuff done. But that's the impression I get from those people, that they perceive him as getting stuff done.
Well, I mean, you will know about the raising all the railways on this like overpass story that Dan Andrews has spent billions on. And I don't know if you've noticed this for Franklin, but I certainly have. Because of the traffic lights they've installed on those underpasses where the railway is now rolling above, it's actually slower than it used to be when there were like gates to open for the trains. It's actually slower.
Yeah, maybe it is, but obviously people, I don't know what it is. I mean, I don't understand what they think.
It must be just like idiocracy.
Yeah, I think
like that movie where the people like used to water their crops with the juice, and where everyone watched movies about farting because that was the highest. I
think you're being a bit cruel now.
I don't know if I am, man. I'm really don't.
Well, so Apolitical George in the chat made a comment a little while back where he said that that his theory that the left wing kept winning elections in quite a few places sort of assured his belief that the general public sort of didn't care about the sort of new left wing craziness, and to an extent that's true. I mean, this is why I don't like like the terms like woke, right? I think it kind of very much softens the blow, you know, and you see this sort of hysteria pushed around by sort of right wing media outlets, and they kind of make it sound a bit over the top and a bit silly to the point where people kind of laugh it off. They don't really, you know, there's no sort of real sort of cutting blow there. And to a large extent, and of course it's hard to do that anyway, because any outlet that actually is operating in this sense is very much sort of on the periphery or even entirely just outside of the sort of the regime's Overton, a very own Overton window. So it doesn't get any sort of support, any sort of narrative reinforcement of any kind. And people are just largely trying to get by in that system, and they half the time they're not even consuming the media directly; they're getting it secondhand through a proxy, through someone else. You know, and that's the way it works. And it's like you can complain and say that like this party's terrible, but often people only vote away from that stuff when there's actually good opposition, and there doesn't seem to be that basically anywhere.
Yeah, look, I do think the Liberal Party ran a non-campaign. They didn't really stand for very much. I don't know what you think, Franklin, but to me, they didn't.
Well, I mean, look, out here, you know, I live out in Nationals territory, so it's kind of different out here. We didn't get that out here. I mean, look, obviously this appeals to people in Melbourne, because there are a lot of parts of Melbourne that are very affluent, and the people there, I don't think they're necessarily woke. I mean, maybe some of them are, but they're tolerant of those things. But how do we explain why the Liberals just didn't seem to cut it in a lot of very wealthy areas, actually? Obviously, the woke stuff just isn't on their minds, yet they're also willing to sort of vote left wing on economic issues, presumably. I mean, supposedly this would hurt them in the long run if they keep getting left wing governments. It's going to affect their finances eventually. But there are lots of areas that still voted left wing. I don't. And then in those really inner city areas, like I was looking at Brunswick. So the results for them, the Liberal Party only got 10%. That was with an ethnic candidate who looks like a Vietnamese candidate in Brunswick. They got 10% of the vote. The Victorian Socialists got 8% of the vote. They're only 2% off. There were 700 votes different between the Liberals and the Victorian Socialists. And of course, the Greens and Labor absolutely cleaned up. But there are a lot of rich people who live in Brunswick. It's not the real estate there. I don't know what it would be. I mean, you wouldn't get change out of a couple of million, I think, for a house there. The Liberal Party just don't seem to have any appeal.
Brunswick varies. I used to work there when I was in sales, and like there are big industrial estates and stuff like that in Brunswick. But yeah, it varies. There are bits that are wealthier for sure, but there are also some crappy bits.
But they've got this problem everywhere, like Hawthorne. In Hawthorne, it's neck and neck.
That's a middle class area of Melbourne.
Well, it's more than middle class.
Yeah.
That's one of the most expensive areas of Melbourne.
Yeah, I used to live in Hawthorne, so yeah.
I mean, isn't that where Jeff Kennett hails from? I believe he hails from around there. I mean, apparently they're neck and neck currently. 50.7 for the Liberals, 49.3 for an independent.
But it's pretty lefty, the Franklin, to be honest. Hawthorne that's one of these inner city liberal kind of areas, you know.
Yeah, it's weird though, because the houses there are millions and millions of dollars. So the people who live there they're working in finance, and they're doctors, top doctors, and that sort of stuff. You can't afford a house in Hawthorne unless you're extremely wealthy.
Yeah.
And presumably left-wing economic policies would affect them. And yet, certainly on social issues, I mean, for those people, the sort of religious right, they're really convinced that there's this bogeyman of the religious right that's coming for them. And given the choice between sort of siding with the outer right of the Liberal Party, let alone any so-called fringe parties, they're gonna side with Teal independents and Greens and so on over the religious right, because they're not right-wing in that sense. They want right-wing economic policies, and yet they're willing to vote against their own economic interests for social interests. It's
lot of women know the Franklin. A lot of women, and women, like, I'm not trying to be misogynistic here, but like, women vote for authority. They vote for the government most of the time. And Dan Andrews was giving women free tampons.
Well, but they didn't vote for the government. They didn't vote for authority in the federal election. There's a deeper, longer term trend here that I think the Liberals are going to be unelectable eventually, because they're going to have to choose between. Right. They're going to really piss off the religious types and people out in the countryside and so on who are more conservative. So they're going to have to choose between them and all of these wets in the inner cities, and those two groups can no longer be reconciled. Like out here, I think a lot of people, they absolutely hate the so-called wets now, and we saw that with the federal election, people are actually cheering them losing their seats. Simultaneously, the people in those inner city, very wealthy suburbs, they really do regard the other people in their party as literally wanting to bring in the Handmaid's Tale. I don't see how those two groups can be reconciled for very much longer. And I think
frankly, the Liberals have to go right, just like.
Well, but if they do that, I mean, those inner, they can't win an election without those inner, without their sort of.
In Australia, I think you're probably right. But to me, the Liberals are in the same position as the Conservatives, in inverted commas, in the UK. If they don't go right, they're just indistinguishable from the left. And why are you going to vote for them?
But if they do go right, they're never getting back those Teal seats. They will never get back Kooyong and all those federal.
When everything goes to shit, they might.
Probably not even then.
I don't know. I disagree with you about that.
But those areas will be pretty well inoculated against decline in the same way that other places will be.
Not quite so much as you think, mate, because it's the middle class who have some savings that are going to be destroyed by what we are heading into now.
But these aren't the middle class. These are the upper class. These suburbs, like in Hawthorne, you're not getting change.
All right. They're lower upper class. All right, yeah, you can say that.
But where's the upper class if not Hawthorne?
In Australia, it's a very small number of people. To be fair, the Franklin, it's a very small number of people in Australia. It's a bit larger number of people in the UK, perhaps. Actually, certainly, but. Yeah, I don't know. I just think if we don't get a total breakdown, and I think we are going to get a total breakdown, I'm not disagreeing with you. I think, electoral politics for the right is pretty well fucked. Excuse my language, but a total breakdown is going to change things. And it's not going to change things just for those relatively few people in Australia who could be called upper class, and the slightly bigger number in the UK. But it's also going to change everything for those upper middle class people, who I think are the much larger number in Australia and the UK.
The Labour Party seems to be very effective at keeping those people on side, though.
like I said,
they may talk about being left wing, but they're very managerial, and they need and like managers, and so they keep those people on side as a result.
I don't disagree with you, mate. I just think that when everything goes to shit, and it's going to, and you've said this on your streams for like at least 18 months now. Like the only issue is how long is it going to take to go to shit, not the fact that it is going to go to shit. And I think when that happens, that may change things.
Yeah, that always seems to be one election away from happening. And in the meantime,
Everything just gets worse.
Well, yeah, and part of the problem too in Australia is that, like if you were to look at a country like Japan, for instance, that has a homogeneous population,
Yeah.
everything can go to shit there, but they can rebuild from that. I suspect that in Australia now it's such a dog's breakfast because of diversity that there's no way that they're ever going to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Even with white people, the white people in Australia now see themselves as completely different. I mean, I was in Melbourne yesterday. I went to the zoo with my son, and just looking at the white people in Melbourne, I just thought, I don't relate to those people. I don't look at those people and say they're my people, they're my group, because so many of them, and I know that they would say the same about me. They would. I mean, I have friends in Melbourne who, if they actually really knew what I actually think about a whole lot of things, would be horrified. I think it's such a dog's breakfast now that no one's going to put that back together again. I don't think it's going to be
very difficult. Very, very difficult. I'll agree with that. Yeah, we have as like Western, vaguely Anglo-Celtic, right of center people. I think we have at very best a 15 to 20% chance of saving ourselves at very best. And like I said, I think that's being optimistic, to be honest. And I was called optimistic after our last stream. I don't know. I just think we're a long way gone. I think in some ways Australia is a bit weaker than UK because its population was smaller to start with. But on the other hand, I don't think the POS is quite as bad in Australia today as it is in most of the UK now. So I don't know, but I'm not optimistic. I think we have a small fighting chance. But in UK, for example, that small fighting chance absolutely involves the so-called, in inverted commas, conservative party has to be destroyed. Because if it's not, we've got no chance.
I mean, I just think it's unrealistic to think that we're going to have any kind of electoral solution to this. And I think that as long as people are really sort of driven by that, there's going to be a lot of copium, and there's going to be a lot of misallocation of resources and so on, if people really think that they're going to vote their way out of this mess.
I don't think we can vote our way out of this mess. I would like to think we could, because I'm absolutely anti-violence, Susan. But if we can, I don't think we can, really, to be honest.
Well, listen, I'm not black-pilled about these election results, and they don't come as a surprise to me. I think a lot of people vastly overestimated the idea that because of the past 3 years that everyone was going to throw Dictator Dan out. I'm
sorry. I do say that, Franklin, that I really did think that a lot of sane people, not everyone, but a lot of sane people, would not be the rape victim who would vote for the rapist, which is what most Victorians have actually done.
Well, I mean, to use that analogy, to continue that analogy, maybe women are attracted to bad boys.
Yeah, and absolutely. I mean, look, Lady Short's in the chat, and I'm not absolutely misogynistic at all. I don't have high expectations of most women, but Lady Short is an exception. But yeah, I do think a lot of women vote for lefty shit, and they do the same in Australia, they do it in UK, and they do it in the USA, they do it in Canada, they do it in New Zealand. And I think there is enough evidence for everyone to see that by now.
I think one of the longer term trends too, is that we've now tipped away from the boomers, and if you look at the politicians, they tend to be Gen X now. Boomers are a little bit too old now. And it's just a generational changing of the guard. Gen X women are just a completely different breed to older women. And there's this whole sort of girl boss theme and all this. And certainly with much younger people than that. I mean, when millennials become the dominant demographic, we're completely screwed. And I think that the left is just it's reaping the fruit from the seeds that it sowed decades ago. It's marched through the institutions and so on. And the right has been asleep at the wheel on this, and they're trying to sort of solve these problems that have their roots a long time ago. They lost this a generation ago when all of these Gen X women who are now making their mark on politics, when they were kids, essentially, they lost it then.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. Look, I mean, I know in the US midterm elections, the figures were detailed enough that we could see that married women tended to vote right wing, whereas single women almost invariably vote left wing. I'm not sure if the Aussie figures are going to be detailed enough for us to tell that, and I'd be interested to see if that was the same.
But it would suggest that doesn't hold here, because in these very wealthy suburbs of Melbourne, you can't really afford to buy a house there on a single income. And a lot of those women, a lot of the candidates, the teal independents, they're married, they're this sort of they're living their dream, you know, they're success stories. We can't deny that.
You
mean
they have maybe one child and a cock of a husband?
Well, sure, but they can still, but they're not a sort of a caricature of some sort of cat lady living alone, blah blah blah.
There's a lot of them in that area, though. The Franklin there is, and often, like bear in mind, there are quite a lot of chicks who live in their parents' home, or are divorce rate victors, shall we say? There's quite a lot of them.
I think there's a lot of cope, though, because as long as we keep telling ourselves those stories that it's all these sort of cat ladies, and it's not the woman who you see in the Range Rover driving the two kids to the private school, who then goes off to her job as a pediatrician or something. As long as we keep telling ourselves that it's not those middle class and upper middle class professional women who are married and who do have kids, then I think we're going to continue to be shocked. I mean, that's why I wasn't shocked, because I think that's the case. I think Gen X women are like that. Even the married ones, the successful ones.
I don't disagree with you, but like all the evidence I've seen is that most women who are married and have been married for a while, particularly when they have children, tend to follow their husband's voting patterns. Now, it may be that Australia these days is in places is so feminized that a woman following a bloke is just going to be left wing. It might be, I don't know, but it's not the case in America anyway.
Look, I don't think that. I think here the Gen X girl boss is a phenomenon. And I think the guys, everyone in those areas thinks like that. I mean, they're willing to vote for teals who are just, they're sort of
totally lefties, basically.
Yeah, but they're sort of this very sly thing. They're willing to vote for those people over the Liberal candidates who are then, you know, like. Does anyone imagine? I don't know enough about these candidates, so this is pure conjecture. But does anyone imagine that the Liberal candidates in in Kew or Hawthorne are some sort of rabid Christian fundamentalists. Like, does anyone really believe that? Those guys, they're going to work for Keen PMG, or they're just going to be this sort of
Didn't
guys
they
in
spend-
suits.
Didn't the Liberals spend most of their time slagging off right-wing Christian candidates? As far as
Yeah,
I
so
that was almost the only thing I saw they did.
right. So those, I mean, who really thinks that the Liberal candidates in these electorates are some sort of far-right bogeyman? I mean, clearly they're not, and yet even they were too right-wing for their electorates in some cases. Being some sort of wet liberal who just wants, I don't know, more tax cuts for rich people, and who they would have been mouthing all the platitudes necessary about climate change and LGBT and all the rest of it, and
Which is all vile, yeah.
right. But they would have been mouthing all of those platitudes. So why exactly were they on the nose, or why are they only just going to scrape over the line?
All right, Franklin, let me ask you this, and this is my own view. I reckon the Liberals, and I'm not saying they'll do it because I think the Australian Liberals are exactly like the so-called British Conservatives, in inverted commas, and they're just another globalist pie. I've no great love for the Liberals. I wanted to see Dan Andrews gone. That was all I hoped for. It wasn't that I thought, oh yeah, the Liberals will be great. I didn't. I think that a real right-wing party has to be pro-family and pro-small c conservatism in terms of social conservatism. And I think those guys would get some support, but the Liberals will never do it, just like the British Conservatives will never do it. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, I agree. That's why I think they're going to be unelectable because they can't reconcile these two wings of their party. Because I think, do you know that guy Charles Murray, that American?
I do.
So he wrote a book a few years ago called Coming Apart, and the basic thesis there was that all these traditional institutions, such as the family, have just gone into free fall in the lower and working classes, but in the upper class and the upper middle class, they're still holding, like, the marriage rates have declined and all of these other things have declined, but only marginally. If you live in Kew or Hawthorne, the chances are that you live in as a married couple with kids, and they both hold down professional jobs and so on and so forth. And so all of the negative aspects of the modern culture just haven't filtered through, despite the fact that people may talk about, okay, their kid's friend at a private school is transitioning or whatever. Generally speaking, those sort of real social markers of social disorder are actually far more prevalent amongst poorer people than they are amongst the upper middle class. They still intuitively they understand that if you want to be a successful person, you have to do certain things, and those things are actually quite traditional. But that probably also insulates them from a lot of this stuff, so they can kind of play the cynical game where they will vote for more social disorder because it will never affect them, in the same way that they can be in favor of refugees and so on, because no refugee is ever going to afford a house in Hawthorne. So it's easy for them to virtue signal and so on and so forth, and for them to be sort of they've always had an animus against the poor people in the party, the sort of the unwashed masses. They want them to vote for them, but they've always really despised them. I knew a lot of these guys when I was at university and in school, and they absolutely despised the sort of what they would describe as the mouth-breathing people in the outer suburbs who have
bogans.
Christian, yeah, and they're sort of, oh, look at these people, they go to these mega churches or whatever. Oh, it's so crass. Their version of Christianity is so crass. Blah blah blah. They actually really dislike those people, and they're insulated from all of the worst elements of left-wing policy because.
But ever less, Franklin.
Yes,
ever less.
Yes, sure, but
that's
for now,
what I don't think that's what they. I think that's what they don't see. is that their divide is like quite narrow now.
Yeah, and they may even see it in their own lives, in that their kids may have gone to a private school and they haven't come out with successful jobs such that they can then buy a house in the area where they grew up and so on. And they can see maybe there's been a social decline, downward social mobility within their own family and so on. But to a certain extent, they can still buy their way out of these problems. And things are still holding for a little bit, I think. And their children, of course, are extremely left-wing. Again, I don't know who the natural constituency for the Liberal Party is going to be in coming years, because they're caught between this rock and a hard place where they either have to go really right-wing and become an openly sort of conservative Christian party or something
Which
like
is
that.
what they should do.
Well, not from their point of view. If they want to get elected, they don't. There's no. That's what I'm saying.
They're not going to get elected by trying to be more left-wing than the Labour Party and the
But they're
Greens.
also not going to get elected if they become openly really right-wing. That's why the Teals and the Greens have been growing massively in those areas.
You see, but this is my problem, frankly. Look, I totally see what you're saying, and I think you're absolutely right. But the Liberal Party cannot be more left-wing than Labour and the Greens. They can't.
But it can't be more right-wing either. It can't be more right-wing than it already is.
If they're
in fact,
not
being
more
as right-wing.
But they would end up with more.
You've got to stop
votes.
seeing it from your perspective, though. You've got to stop seeing it from your perspective. To someone who just wants to go and work at his job at KPMG and then fly to Europe for a vacation, these sort of mega churches or whatever in the outer suburbs, they are perceived as literally Hitler. Like, from their perspective, that's how it is. We have to stop seeing it from this kind of dissident right-wing perspective, like everyone in the world is secretly, or everyone in Australia is secretly dissident right-wing. They're not.
No, I don't think everyone is, but I think there is a lot of people in Australia who had the Liberals in this election, for example, been a bit more actually right-wing and turned around and said, no, we're not going to do more lockdowns and we're not going to force people to have vaccinations that probably kill more people than the virus, as we now know. I reckon they would have got more votes.
They would have been wiped out in those inner city areas. The Teals would have destroyed them.
In the inner city areas, they weren't going to win anyway.
But they're not going to win in the outer suburbs, because there were these huge slabs of Melbourne that are rusted on Labor. Like, they're never going to, like, you look at the results in the western and northern suburbs, and as I said, in some of these suburbs, they're polling like 20%. The Liberals come in third in these electorates. There are huge swaths of western and northern Melbourne that there is literally nothing that the Labor Party could do that would make them vote. You know, as we've seen, there's literally nothing that the Labor Party could have done over the past couple of years that would make them vote Liberal. Those areas are so solidly Labor that the Liberal Party, the number of seats it would lose in the inner city, it couldn't make those up in the outer suburbs, because some of those would have to be in the western and northern suburbs, and they're just not going to pick them up.
The only thing I will say to that, Franklin, is that there used to be large swaths of England that people used to say exactly that about. Like the Labour Party could put up a dildo and it would be elected just because it was a Labour dildo against anyone else. And that completely broke down after Brexit. It's going to come back because the so-called, in inverted commas, Conservative Party have done what they've done, and we now have an Indian governor. But the fact is, you can change that.
But even in suburbs, in electorates where the Liberal Party was running an ethnic candidate in heavily ethnic areas against people with Anglo family names for for the Labour Party, they still couldn't win those electorates. Like, they're just unelectable. I think it's this myth that there are all these secret conservative voters in Victoria.
Ethnic voters are never conservative.
No, but the white working class, they don't vote for these people. They don't vote because there's this perception that the Liberal Party is for rich people. And if the Liberal Party swings towards trying to court working class people, it's just going to completely lose those.
I don't know the Franklin about that, because I think I still see a lot of cars going around, driving around with stickers in the back that say Australia, love it or leave it, and stuff like that. I still think that if you could get the Liberal Party, obviously you can't do the White Australia policy, which was so popular for so long. But if you could get the Liberal Party heading in that direction, I think a lot of ordinary Aussies would still support that.
But it's not born out of the results. Like Bayswater, which is now a suburban electorate, actually swung towards the ALP. It's not born out of the results. The Liberal Party, they're almost
but you have to look at the Liberal Party campaign, which was almost non-existent, don't you?
But it's the same at the
there
federal
was
level.
almost no. The only thing I learned about the Liberal Party campaign during the Liberal Party campaign was they didn't like right-wing Christians. That was the only thing I learned. Did the Liberal Party tell you anything else?
They didn't tell me anything because I live out in Nationals.
Yeah, absolutely. I see what you're saying. I know you're a rural guy, and the rural Aussie guys are still pretty based. But I just don't understand how you can't ignore what the Liberal Party actually did, which was they didn't campaign, except to say we don't like right-wing Christians. That's the only thing they did, pretty much.
Yeah, but that's why I say they're caught between a rock and a hard place on this, because they're trying. They need to make a choice, and either choice is going to entail alienating a significant percentage of.
They've got to go right. They've got to go right. If
it's
they
not
go
going to win.
left,
It's not going to.
Well, it might not, and I agree with you.
Well, I'm not saying this like I want them to get elected. I'm just saying. I'm not saying this from the perspective of, I want them to do this or do that or whatever. I'm just saying that I can't see how they're viable at an electoral level now, because the party has these two weird poles that don't like each other.
Yeah,
and I can't see them. They can't reconcile them.
They have to split.
Yeah, but that's going to leave them with permanently. There's going to be a cap where they're going to get 15% each of the electorate.
I don't know about that.
They get about a third of the primary vote. So if they split that in half, they're going to get 16% each, which is what I said 15%, but okay, they're going to be unelectable. There'll be tons of seats where they
But what you're basically saying is that are unelectable anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, they are. Well, that's why I said there's no electoral solution to this.
No, and there probably isn't, and it'll probably all come down to violence. But in Minecraft, Susan. But yeah, I see what you're saying entirely. But if you are a politician and you're on the right, you have to go right. If you go left, you're always going to lose. It's because you're never going to be left-wing enough.
Of course, but that assumes that the electorate is right wing. The electorate's not right wing. It's not people in those so they might pick up a handful of outer suburban seats doing that, and then they would be they would probably end up with fewer seats than the Nationals. They would be the minor coalition party.
Look, to my way of thinking, the Liberals and the Nationals both need to go more right wing, and look, if that doesn't work, then it doesn't work. But we're going to lose anyway, as you are saying, the Franklin.
Well, I mean, I don't see myself as we in this. I don't.
All
relate
right,
to
all right.
these
You're
parties.
saying the right is going to lose, okay? Would that be fair? Yeah. All right. The right's going to lose.
What is supposedly the right? Like it's
All
not.
right. What is supposedly the right? Absolutely, totally agree with you. So if the right's going to lose anyway, then shouldn't the political types on the right be actually right wing? Because there's no point in losing and trying to pretend to be left wing, is there?
But that's not where they're coming from. Those guys who are the top
No, they just want
power
jobs.
brokers in the well, that's right, and they don't actually want those people in the outer suburbs to share power with them. They still I knew tons of guys like this when I was younger. They very much see themselves as to the manor born, and they begrudgingly accept the fact that they have to get those people's votes, but they don't actually like them. They don't actually want them admitted to the country club.
Fair enough.
And they're still clinging to this idea that they want to be part of respectable society. They want to be, when they go to their corporate job, when they go to their corporate social functions and so on, they don't want to be associated with the sort of the mouth breathers in the outer suburbs. There's this status thing going on for them that they would rather be losers but still be part of the country club than be sort of kicked out of the country club and sent to the sort of the outer suburban football club and be forced to be a member there instead. Like there's a very weird psychology going on there, and they can't accept that that's the alternative for them.
Yeah, look, I don't disagree with any of that. I'm not looking at it from the point of view of a liberal politician because I'm not liberal. I just think, look, yes, you're right. We probably can't vote our way out of this. If I was a right of centre mainstream politician, I would go, we can't out left the left. So there's no point in trying to, because we never can. But I'm not, and you are almost certainly right that we can't vote our way out of this, and that's quite sad because nasty things are going to happen eventually, one way or the other. Might be nasty for us. Well, actually, it will be nasty for us. It might be nasty for other people, and I care less about that, to be honest. But
look, we have an electoral system that's pretty unique in that because it's preferential, you can actually vote for a minor right-wing party and you won't.
If you
waste your vote, so to speak, right?
Yeah, and if you go through all that long fold-out stuff that you get at Australian elections, which I am fairly convinced about 60% of people never do.
Yeah, but even seeing the House of Reps, right? You can say, all right, look, I think the Liberals are too left wing, so look, I'll put them third last, I'll put the ALP second last, and I'll put the Greens last, right? So you can do that, and you can vote for Family First or someone.
Yep.
Top of the ticket, right? So go and look at the primary vote for Family First. Like it's like 1%. Yep. Nobody's voting for these guys. The electorate is not even remotely conservative.
I think I'm right in saying, Franklin, that the legalized marijuana party got more votes than One Nation in Victoria.
So for the Liberal Party to go in that direction, but there's no support for that. Like they're going to pick up, like let's say they were to court all of the One Nation voters and Family First voters and all of those people, they're going to pick up single-digit percentages there, and they're going to lose 20%, 30%, 40% of Liberal voters in doing so. So they're going to end up with a net loss of 35% of their potential voters. If there were all of this appeal for these parties that were rabidly anti-Dan Andrews, then we would have seen their primary vote tick up, and the Liberals still would have got through on preferences.
Yeah, most people are beat me harder, Daddy. Yes, they are. I know that.
So the idea that, well, they need to go right so they can pick up a couple of percent of One
No, no,
Nation
no,
and
no,
Family
no.
First and so on.
Franklin, I think you're misunderstanding me. What I'm saying is, if they want to be a right-wing party, they need to go right. I don't think they are a right-wing party.
They don't want to be a
anymore.
right-wing party.
No, and the British Conservatives are not either with our current Indian governor. But the thing is, as you said, all that means is we can't vote our way out of this. Like,
Yeah,
everything is going to be destroyed. Everything. Like, everything that we as white Anglo-Celtic people think of as our history and all the rest of it, it's all going to die. And our only chance is when it dies, can we come back from that? Because if we can't, then we're FUCK.
In the meantime, I think all of this electoral stuff is a massive distraction because people are putting all of their eggs in this basket of, oh well, we'll kick Dictator Dan out. Like, classic example of this, my neighbor last year was building some fences, and he came over to me and he was lecturing me about how I should be attending these rallies. And I was like, yeah, I'm sure Dan Andrews cares that you're attending a rally out in the middle of nowhere against him. And he drove up to Canberra as part of that whole thing. And in the meantime, he was literally doing nothing to make himself more resilient. But he was putting all of his eggs in this basket of, oh, well, I'll march because, the democratic process, blah, 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 and we'll vote this guy out and blah, blah, blah.
I don't disagree with you at all, mate. I think you're totally right. I think you're totally right. I don't disagree with you at all. And if I had any doubts, this election has totally removed them from me.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully more people sort of, maybe not necessarily in our sphere, but a little bit adjacent to it. Because I know, like, I've got friends who they will say, oh, but you have to vote for the Liberals because otherwise you'll get the Greens. And I say, well, like at the federal level, good thing we didn't vote for the Greens, or we would have got gay marriage, or they would have taken our guns away, or they would have opened the floodgates, or they would have made it impossible for working people to afford a house. All
of
really
which
dodged the bullet.
Happened, yes.
Yeah, just happened to be under sort of these sort of arch conservative governments of Howard, and then
no, mate, I'm totally with you. Like, there are conservatives in the UK. Conservative supporters in the UK who hate me because I say we can't vote Conservative anymore.
And in the meantime, this allows a massive amount of hopium and copium, because whilst they're sort of looking at all of that, they're not doing these other things to prepare themselves for the fact that things are going to get significantly worse. They need to be networking. They need to be building their own resilience and so on and so forth. They're just not thinking like that because they're always thinking, oh, it'll be okay because I'm right, because my ideas are right, and everyone else eventually will recognize that.
Yeah, no, the Franklin, in case you got the idea wrong, I've never thought that. I did want to get rid of Dan Andrews. I was desperately disappointed that Victorian voters voted for their rapist, but absolutely, you're totally right.
They don't see it. They voted for their dream guy. They voted for the guy on the Mills and Boon cover.
The daddy who told them what to do every other day.
Well, but he's perceived as being like, think about those. I've never actually read one, of course, but those Mills and Boon novels, they always have a sort of a formulaic plot where it's the woman meets pirate / werewolf / I don't know, whatever, barbarian or something.
It's 50 Shades of Grey, basically. It became an enormous worldwide bestseller because women loved it.
Yeah, but that's like that's what I'm saying about this sort of Gen X girl boss psychology. Like, I don't think anyone's realized the true horror that's coming down the pike when Gen Xers and millennial women take over, because they're going into all of the the professions, and they can have their levers on their hands of power in more ways than one. I don't think anyone realizes the true horror that's coming with all of that.
Yeah,
like it's really
totally agree with you. Totally agree with you.
it's going to be
All
insane.
we're seeing at the moment is the edge of it.
Yeah,
And it's, they want all young boys to be converted into trannies. They regard all male, the ways male men behave as toxic masculinity. They think that people like the Indian governor Sunak of Britain, who was appointed and never elected, they should just run us. I fear for it, mate. Honestly, the only thing that makes me happy is I was born in 1965, and I ain't gonna see 2060. Unlike my son, and
it's going to be a big problem even before then. I think.
I think I'll
You'll see
see the
You'll
shit.
see it.
Yeah, I think I might. I mean,
Oh well, this is coming in the 2030s.
yeah.
So you're not planning on dying in the next 10 years, right?
I'm not planning on dying anytime, mate. But the point is, I will die at some point, and which is another thing most modern people don't realize. But the thing is, like, you got to look. The Agenda 2030 stuff, with zero emissions from nations like Australia and UK, who already make almost no emissions. It's going to make no difference to worldwide emissions, particularly when, like, China is building 100 coal-fired power stations powered by magic Australian coal, which is great in China, but not good in Australia. But it's all nonsense, and it's obviously all nonsense to anyone who looks at it at all. But the whole Agenda 2030 thing is designed to make everyone in the West, including Australia, vastly poorer. And it's already doing that. Just look at your energy bills.
Absolutely. People are going to keep voting for this stuff, and of course, I mean, there's a whole element of society that's not democratically accountable anyway. But I think there's a generational change here, and we're going to have to ride this tiger, basically.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I don't see what else we can do. Like you said, make local networks, get firearms, because they're going to be useful. In Minecraft, isn't, of course. But honestly, we're headed for, I think we're already going in to something that might be like the Great Depression. It's certainly going to be the worst recession that there has been for over 100 years. And Australia will get away with it a bit because of the mining stuff, but I don't think that's going to hold it. It's not enough. And the Australian housing market is almost as vulnerable as the British housing market. And when that goes to shit, everything's going to go to shit.
I think people have a weird love affair with socialism here, where they don't want to pay more for things, but they want other people to pay more for the things that they like. So, like, they don't, it's not accurate to say they don't like taxes. They don't like their own taxes, but they want all of the services that they get from the government are absolutely essential, of course, and someone else should pay for those. I suspect that as things continue to get worse, politicians like Dan Andrews, who are very dictatorial, will actually become more appealing, because people will demand that somebody does something, because most people will not be in a position to do anything for themselves anyway.
And women especially like someone who does something.
Yeah, but tons of men, because
men in inverted commas, yeah.
Well, yeah, but postmodernity is such that everyone is tapped into the system. It's actually very, very difficult not to be tapped into the system to a significant degree in this country. You really do have to basically abandon everything and go out and live in the boonies in a shack, because everything is tied into these systems, whether government or corporate. And as these things break down, ironically, people will demand more control over their lives by the very things that are letting them down. Eventually, it will get to a complete crisis point. But I think we have a very strange decade ahead where people will actually demand more control from people like Dan Andrews rather than less.
The morons, yeah, I agree with you.
Well, lots of people. I mean, it's going to be. We are in a tiny, tiny minority of the population.
Yeah, well, and we're in a bit of a bubble because we speak to each other. I get that, mate. You're entirely correct. Coventer says the UK resembles Airstrip 1 more and more every day. Let me tell you, if that's the case, Coventer, then Australia resembles Airstrip 2 more and more every day. The B-52s are now based in Northern Australia, aiming at China. So
well, that's another thing that I think at some point we're going to be forced to make a choice between our sort of cultural and military alliance with the US and our economic reliance upon not just China but other parts of Asia. And that's going to be a real Clayton's choice for us. But I think
I don't think Australia can possibly go with China, to be honest.
No, it won't. And the sensible thing that we should have done would have been
to become neutral.
Yeah, and build up relations with other Asian nations and so on. But expecting us to have done anything involving foresight is a little bit too much to ask. And so I think that we are going to be forced to take one for the team economically. And I can't see that people would side with China over the US anyway, culturally, all of that sort of stuff.
No, absolutely not. Nor would I. Like, I am very, very neutral on Russia. And I'm quite... I can see Russia's point in Ukraine. I'm not in favor of China over Taiwan at all. But then I don't like the Chinese Communist Party. Yeah. So.
And I think we're going to find ourselves caught between an iron curtain. We're going to be like Romania was in the Cold War. We're going to be a vassal state that's impoverished and backwards. And eventually, decades and decades into the future, when we emerge from that, we'll be playing catch up in a big way.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know, Franklin. I hope there's going to be a fairly big and fairly serious breakdown that might lead to real political change. I'm not hopeful about it, but I think that's our best chance that we have.
I think the problem, though, is that, as I said earlier, if you take a country like Japan, for instance, they can collapse and rebuild. Yeah. Australia is going to be such a dog's breakfast coming out of this. Even just amongst white people.
Same with UK.
All of the West is going to be like that.
Yeah.
It's and the white people, as I said, I mean, when I go to Melbourne, I don't look at those people and think, oh yeah, I have so much in common with them.
I do a few of them. I'll sometimes see a nice white family with their kids, especially when I go to Melbourne Zoo, which is an excellent zoo, by the way. And it was based on London Zoo in the 19th century. And it's one of the best zoos in Australia. And I go there quite a lot because I like animals. And yeah, I sometimes see a nice white Australian family with their kids there, and I think, okay, this was pretty much like my dad taking me to London Zoo 40 years ago. I do. Okay.
The demographics are really different.
For sure. Of course they are. I'm not disputing that.
The funny thing about those white people is yesterday when I was there, I saw a guy, I don't know him, but one of his kids was in an activity with one of my kids. And I said to him, are you from where we're from? And he said, yeah. And I said, oh, my kid did this activity with your kid. He didn't know who I was. But but just sort of coincidental that I saw a guy. So it might be that all of those people at the zoo who looked reasonable were actually from my own town, and all of the other people there are from Melbourne. So I don't see much hope actually with Melbourne.
Yeah, no, you might be right. I mean, look, Arlo's saying in the chat, the last time I went to Melbourne Zoo, migrants were banging on the glass to stir up the gorillas. I actually went there with a girlfriend.
What were the gorillas banging on the glass to stir up the migrants?
No, I think it was the other way around. I'm sure Arlo is correct. I get what you're saying. No, the last time I went there was with a girlfriend from Queensland, and they were doing the same thing, and I told them to fucking stop. But you know what I mean? Yeah, because I do things like that. I kind of like animals. But yeah, no, absolutely. Look, yeah, so 500,000 immigrants in the UK this year. What can you say? Net immigrants, by the way. It was much more than that, because that's allowing for all the Brits who left the UK. Under the Conservatives, in his small c, under the so-called Conservatives, with inverted commas. And of course, we have Rishi Sunak, who is our Indian banker governor, and Jeremy CUNT, who is the Chancellor, both of whom are full-on corporate globalists. Where does UK go from this? I don't know.
You're not very good.
George is saying, I hate to be that guy, but I think the zoos are horrible. Do you know what? Modern zoos, George, breed a lot of animals that are in danger in the wild. So they're not actually as bad as you think. And increasingly their enclosures, etc., take account of the sort of place they need to live. So anyway. Jeremy Hunt, Lady of Shalott, says, turn off your heat to support Ukraine. Yeah, I mean, I think we should all freeze grannies and granddads to death this winter in order to support Globo Homo in Ukraine. I really think that's a good idea. We should do that. We also now have lots of evidence that the China virus came from a lab. Wasn't a natural thing. We have loads of evidence from that now, including people who at the time were shilling for everything that was being done. The lockdowns didn't really work. Masks were a complete waste of time. And the vaccines are currently killing far more people than the China virus. And there's ample evidence, all that stuff now. And it's just because people can't be bothered to look that they don't know it. It's just insane to me, mate. All right, I have the Franklin. Would you like to show your channel?
No, it's called the Franklin.
It is. It's called the Franklin, yes. And you have a couple of pretty regular streams you do, don't you?
Yes, I do a monthly stream. It's generally the first Saturday of the month here in Australia. 11 a.m. it begins. And then I do one once every 2 or 3 weeks called Love Letters from Your Betters, where I pick out some articles from the media that are very sort of dismissive of the plebs and the sort of our betters and what they think of us. And then I read through those and analyze them. Yeah, and I do occasionally make scripted videos as well.
Yeah, I would just... Sorry, carry on.
Just sort of more documenting the decline than anything these days.
I would just say that Franklin is one of the very best Australian YouTubers. I've streamed with him on several occasions on his channel, and I'm trying to get him to join my Discord, which I will ask him again after the stream. Which is we've got some good Aussies on our Discord, as Lady of Shalott will say. I would also like to plug on Thursday this coming week at 8 p.m. UK time, which is 7 a.m. Australian time. I'm going to be doing an Australian history stream with Chris Gard, which is part one of a two-part stream, which is going to be about what happened in Australia when the original settlers arrived and with the Aboriginal people, and how they got on with each other, etc. And it might surprise quite a lot of people. There's going to be a lot of historical research gone into this. Ellen Hutter is not going to be an Abo stream. It's an Australian history stream. But we will be talking about the relations between the settlers and the Aboriginals, which are not, surprisingly enough, what many people who talk about Invasion Day these days will think. A lot of people are going to be surprised. So that's going to be part one of that with Chris Gard. And there's going to be a load of historical research in that stream. And then I'll do part two a week or two later, which I will hope will include Chris and also Jobu. Because Jobu is a hard-working family man, and he does shift work, so he can't do the research as quickly as some of us can. So he'll be in part two. So yeah, look out for that, guys. They'll be on Thursday, UK time. Thank you very much for all my guests this evening, especially to Franklin. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, mate, you're always welcome. And like I said, when I stop the stream, I'm going to try and persuade you to join my Discord. But anyway, go well, folks. And as always, I will finish us off with a tune.
Oh, we take him from the city or the plough, and we drill him and we dress him out so neat. We teach him to uphold his manly brow, and how to walk and where to put his feet. It doesn't matter who he was before, or what his parents fancied for his name. Once his pocket has a shilling, and a uniform he's filling, we call him Tommy Atkins all the same. Oh, Tommy Atkins, got a good and hard hand, got a credit for your calling and to all your native land. May your luck be never failing, may your gal be ever true. God bless you, Tommy Atkins, here's your country's love to you. Any time of war, it's Tommy to the front, and we shipped him out in trooper through the scene. You sit at home while Tommy bears the brunt for fighting for his country and his king. And whether he's on India's sorrow strand or pouring out his blood in the Sudan, just to keep our flag a-flying, he's a-doing and a-dying, every inch of him a soldier and a man. Oh, Tommy Atkins, got a good and heart and hand, got a credit for your calling and to all your native land. May your luck be never failing, may your gal be ever true. God bless you, Tommy Atkins, here's your country's love to you. Oh, Tommy Atkins, got a good and heart and hand, got a credit for your calling and to all your native land. May your luck be never failing, may your gal be ever true. God bless you, Tommy Atkins, here's your country's love to you.
Okay, there we go. That was a nice patriotic tune from the late 1920s or early 1930s. Thanks for joining us, guys. See us next week for Splendid Isolation number 100, which will be a special one. But also come and watch our Australian history stream on Thursday at about 8 p.m. UK time, which will be, I think, it'll be in the morning for Australians. So we'll see you then. Go well, Quakes.